Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you so much to our witnesses who are here today. I appreciate your time and your willingness to be here and speak with us and answer these very important questions. Now, I'm going to get right to it. Members of Congress have been told that American taxpayers were defrauded a possible $560 billion as a result of the federal government's negligence in carrying out these federal COVID relief funding programs. And I'm going to start with a rhetorical question here, but does anyone know of an organization in America or around the world, public or private, that has been scammed out of $560 billion? And simply, is that okay? I certainly can't think of one, and I don't think that it's okay either. So after what was the largest fleecing in American history, possibly world history, can any one of the witnesses today give me the name of one administrator, one director, a supervisor that was fired, demoted, or put on leave because they failed to keep hundreds of billions of dollars from being stolen from the American taxpayers? And I'll yield very quickly to each of our witnesses for a simple yes or no. I'll start with you, Director Smith.
No, ma'am, that's not my focus.
Thank you.
I don't know if as I sit here, I could ask the fellow IGs to see if they know of any actions that have been taken from an administrative side.
Thank you.
Yeah, offhand.
Thank you. I didn't think so. And that's pretty insane. $560 billion we're projecting. And we have hundreds of billions of dollars lost, causing massive inflation. 70% of the money, according to the CEO of LexisNexis Risk Solutions, ended up lining the pockets of crime sent against in countries like China, Nigeria, Russia, and not a single person in charge of distributing that money has been held accountable. So here's how badly the American taxpayer was conned. The United States federal government has reportedly been defrauded of more money in the last 2 years than the entire 2022 tax revenue of England, Italy, Mexico, Ireland, Greece, Israel, Canada, Poland, and Brazil combined. The American taxpayers have one question. How the heck were these bureaucrats so dang incompetent that they were being scammed out of $35 million every hour for nearly 2 years? Absolutely insane. And what's equally concerning is the fact that for years, Congress has known the size and scope of which the American taxpayer was defrauded, yet this committee refused to act until now that Republicans hold the gavel. And in a desperate attempt to protect the Bidens, the big tech industry, the Democrat Party, the mainstream media has tried to discredit this committee before our work has even begun. There should be nothing more bipartisan than ensuring American tax dollars aren't stolen by fraudsters. But sadly, it's taken a Republican-controlled Oversight and Accountability Committee to be willing to get to work on it. So here we are, the American people had their businesses shut down, they lost their jobs, their livelihoods, their life's work because of government mandates and shutdowns. And that same government spent trillions of dollars, lost hundreds of billions, and the result is skyrocketing inflation and interest rates for the American people. And our role is to ensure that we find out how this happened and make sure that it never happens again and hold those that stole money from the American people accountable. And Chair Horowitz, I would like to ask you, under the Biden administration, we have seen the DOJ wage a full-out attack against the American people, from accusing parents concerned about their children's education of being domestic terrorists, to raiding the homes of pro-life activists, to pressuring private companies to censor conservatives. As Republicans have continued to mention throughout this hearing, there's a clear difference between people who were issued improper payments versus fraudsters who have stolen hundreds of billions of dollars collectively from the American taxpayer with malicious intent. Now, Chair Horowitz, what is the Department of Justice doing to ensure that the federal government is targeting criminals and those who knowingly took millions of dollars from the federal government to fund criminal gangs in Russia, China, and Nigeria?
So we've worked with the department, inspectors general and the PRAC, have worked with the Justice Department on these investigative matters. They've set up a fraud task force. We're a member of it with the Secret Service. We've worked closely with law enforcement partners across the federal government. It's going to take a substantial amount of time, effort, and resources because there are so many cases. We have that partnership working right now. We're going to continue to refer cases to them, and they're going to have to make assessments on which cases to bring criminally. We're also working with them on the improper payment side with the civil lawyers as well, because, again, we want to get the money back for the taxpayers.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I yield back. Thank you, Mr. Bentz. So I just wanted to clarify, we had mentioned, it was mentioned on the other side of the aisle, that not everyone who brings a firearm into the Capitol has had training. Well, in order to legally get a firearm into the Capitol, a member of Congress would have had to go through the Washington, D.C. Concealed Carry Weapons Training Course to bring that in legally, which I've done, which many colleagues have done. And I invite you all to come and take the class. You don't have to get the permit. You don't have to shoot a gun, but take the class. See what the laws are here in Washington, D.C. See the statistics. See how reasonable and safe it is to carry a firearm, to possess one. And you know, there's so many things that are being mentioned on the other side of the aisle. January 6th keeps being brought up. First of all, Republicans didn't incite that. I mean, it's horrible rhetoric for you to keep this up. You know, I'm probably one of the few Republicans that wanted to continue with the January 6th committee because I want the truth out to the American people. I'm tired of you guys running and lying about this and continuously creating this false narrative for the American people. But on January 6th, I was following House rules. There's 3 places where members of Congress cannot carry a firearm. One of them is the House floors. And I was abiding by those rules. And when I heard those doors shaking, I didn't know what was on the other side. And it was the first time in many, many years that I have been unprotected, that I was disarmed, not unarmed, disarmed, because I was not allowed to possess my firearm. Capitol police officers didn't have enough help. Thank God there were members who had their firearms anyway in the House chambers and were helping Capitol Police. And Capitol Police were grateful for their assistance because they were outnumbered significantly. A few months after that, there was a staffer that accidentally brought in a firearm in his bag, ran it through security, and it was minutes, more than 10 minutes, before anyone tracked that staffer down. What if this was somebody with an agenda, with a motive? And then you want us defenseless and not able to protect ourselves? And we don't walk around with Capitol Police officers. Not all of us hire personal security. Most of us like to take that personal responsibility and be our own security when we can. I don't believe that the security of any member here is compromised by having another member of Congress, a highly vetted individual, be able to carry a firearm according to their Second Amendment rights or constitutional rights and defend themselves. But I do want to once again just extend my heartfelt offer to all of you to come and attend a class with me. I host these often so members can obtain their concealed carry weapons permits here in Washington, D.C. Just come and learn on the subject. Hear what our laws are, hear the process of it, and how reasonable it actually is. It's not this big, scary object that's just going to fire on its own. There are safety measures imposed on every firearm, whether there's a safety or not. There are still ways to carry firearms that they're not going to discharge. That's just not something they do. It's an inanimate object. So I appreciate the debate. I look forward to talking more about energy and water and public lands and keeping wolves out of Colorado in the future. But thank you for bringing this up. We can have a little bit of fun in the Natural Resources Committee, and I look forward to defeating this amendment, Mr. Huff.
Gentleman yields back. Does anyone else wish to be recognized?
Mr. Chairman.
Gentlewoman from Colorado, Ms. Boebert, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So with this amendment, I don't think any of us are opposed to actually having oversight to understand the health and safety with with our fossil fuel productions. We want you to know the truth. We want you to see these reports. But as the gentleman from Wisconsin stated, there was a but in that. Not at this time. At this time, we aren't going to use that to go against fossil fuels, but we will use it later. We have been studying the science of fossil fuels. I worked in the oil and gas industry myself, and I know that no one produces energy better than we do, cleaner than we do. And instead, we have an administration right now that's begging Iran, begging Venezuela, begging Saudi Arabia, emptying our strategic petroleum reserves in the name of a midterm election. This is not in the name of public health and safety. This was in the name of an election to get fuel prices down $1 or $2 so they wouldn't have a complete decimation of their party and they would still hold on to their levers of power. And thankfully, the American people saw through some of that. But I mean, just going through this, fossil fuel extraction is a significant driver of carbon pollution. If carbon pollution is your main aim, then let's talk about managing our forests. Because one catastrophic wildfire emits more carbon emissions in a few short days than every vehicle in my state of Colorado running 24/7 for an entire year. So if carbon pollution is what you're after here, then let's get together and manage our forests. We have 6 billion standing dead trees in the western United States, all creating a massive tinderbox waiting to ignite. If you want to talk about water quality, then again, let's talk about managing our forests, because healthy forests have healthy watersheds. We can have water resiliency discussions and water storage discussions where we're seeing policies in states like California where they're dumping hundreds of billions of gallons of water into the ocean where they otherwise could have stored it. If you're talking about low-income communities being impacted, well, let's talk about inflation. Let's talk about how our energy independence lowers inflation. And that's something that this administration surrendered on day one. This is something that they attacked immediately. We should be energy dominant right now. Our natural gas is 42% cleaner than Russia's. So why are you supporting Russia and their energy production and not America? Why are you pro-Putin when it comes to natural gas? Let's export liberty, export freedom around the globe and send our clean LNG to these countries who are currently relying on dictators. And when you're talking about the indigenous communities, well, I invite you all to come to my district where one of our tribes has the first ever zero emissions net power natural gas fired plant. This is innovative. And this is what we should be doing with our other plants, our coal-fired energy plant in Craig, Colorado. I would love to see that transition into what our tribes are doing on their reservations, on their tribal land. And so come out and see what this looks like. See what this net zero energy production actually looks like. Even in Colorado, our coal is arguably the cleanest coal in the world. And climate extremists are sacrificing that at the altar of climate change. And look, I'm not here to deny climate change. I don't think anyone here is. It happens 4 times every year. We're very, very much aware of that. And what we can do to lessen pollutants, we're here for it. That's why we are pro natural gas. That's why we want to lower folks' energy bills. Have you seen the price of energy bills lately? That's because we're banning gas electronics, appliances. That's because we're pushing all of this green energy that's not efficient, it's not reliable, it's not renewable. And I would love to see an actual study on our fossil fuel production, but not in this manner, because there are hidden elements in it. And for that reason, I will be opposing this amendment. And I yield back, Mr. Chair.
5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Matt Taibbi, a respected reporter who published much of the Twitter files, said, quote, Twitter's contact with FBI was constant and pervasive, as if it were a subsidiary. Now, I want to better understand why he would suggest that. Mr. Roth, while at Twitter, how many meetings did you have with the FBI?
I couldn't say for sure, but I would
More
say
than 10?
That's a
More than
reasonable
20?
estimate. I couldn't say for sure.
More than 50?
That seems a bit high.
Many meetings with the FBI. Well, we know how many FBI agents worked at Twitter while you were there?
I don't believe any active FBI
Former
agents.
FBI agents. How many worked there while you were there?
I'm aware of perhaps 2.
Well, we know of at least 9 because they started the BU group chat, BU for Bureau. Now, Mr. Roth, did the FBI ever ask you to share information like users' communication data without going through proper legal channels?
No, they did not, and I would have refused if they had.
That's correct. I see that you denied Agent Chan's request for access to Twitter's data feed. What's sick isn't that you would deny it, it's that the FBI would even ask you for the private data of American citizens without going through legal channels of the law. Now, I want to remind you, Mr. Roth, that you are under oath. Did the FBI ever ask you to do anything that was illegal or questionably legal?
I'm not a lawyer, but certainly not to the best of my recollection or knowledge.
Now, from the hearing that I've been a part of today, it's almost impossible to tell where the FBI ends and where Twitter begins. We have Mr. Baker here, a former FBI agent, and there seems to be a revolving door between the FBI and Twitter itself. Even Mr. Baker said that there was no collusion with the federal government and Twitter, but Mr. Baker, that's you. You are the collusion between the federal government and the FBI. And now with it, this is such a problem because we're seeing censorship all over. Mr. Roth, Ms. Gaddy, did either of you approve the shadow banning of my account at Lauren Boebert? Yes or no?
No, I did not.
Not to the best of my recollection.
Well, let me refresh your memory because on March 12th, 2021, and Mr. Roth, I know you looked at it because Fascist Twitter 1.0 had a public interest exceptions policy, which means for members of Congress to be shadow banned, it had to go before you, Mr. Roth. So I'll ask again, did you shadow ban my account? Yes or no?
Again, not to the best of my recollection.
So the answer is, Mr. Roth, yes, you did. I found out last night from Twitter staff that you suppressed my account for this tweet. It's a freaking joke about Hillary Clinton being angry that she couldn't rig her election. It's a joke, but in response, being the sinister overlords that you all are, you placed a 90-day account filter so I could not be found. And now we see here that Twitter staff said the visibility filter on my account excluded me from top searches, prevented notifications for non-followers, and much more. This is considered an aggressive visibility filter. You silenced members of Congress from communicating with their constituents. You silenced me from communicating with the American people over a freaking joke. Now, who the hell do you think that you are? Election interference? Yeah, I would say that that was taking place because of you four sitting here. The Hunter Biden laptop story was suppressed. A sitting member of Congress was suppressed. A sitting president was banned from Twitter. You know, I bet that Putin is sitting in the Kremlin wishing he had as much election interference as you four here today. We've heard about threats to democracy. Well, what about shutting down a duly elected member of Congress? This is fundamental to our nation's governance, and you all attacked that very foundation. 230 protections? Well, those are for publishers, not for editors. And it's clear you were not acting as publishers, you were acting as editors. And Mr. Chairman, I think it's far past time that we remove 230 protections for big tech platforms who are abusing this protection. And let me just say, I'm not angry for myself. I'm not angry because I was silenced. I can reach out to Elon and to his staff, and I can see what's happened. And I can sit here today and hold you all in account. I am angry for the millions of Americans who were silenced because of your decisions, because of your actions, because of your collusion with the federal government. They can't reach out to Elon. They can't sit here today and hold you into account. We don't know where the FBI ends and Twitter begins. Free speech and even Twitter. Mr. Chairman, I yield.
The lady yields. Went over 24 seconds. I'll give Ms. Porter 24 extra seconds.
Chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Colorado, Ms. Boebert, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, there is a rise and fall in our communities, as Ms. Stansberry pointed out, but it's not just because of the oil and gas industry and the ebbs and flows of that. It's because of politicians and their bad policies that they're forcing on Americans. I know many communities have experienced a very large fall from the rise that they had because they are being regulated into poverty. And, you know, we're not subject to oil and gas. We are subject, unfortunately, to climate extremists, forcing us all to bow at the left's altar of climate change. And I'm very glad that Ms. Stansberry has admitted to the people here in the People's House, the American people, that the Inflation Reduction Act wasn't about reducing inflation. It was the Green New Deal. A con game, title it one way, do another thing, spend money another way. It wasn't to reduce inflation, it was the Green New Deal. You know, back home in Colorado, I've seen firsthand the harm leftist policies have created in my communities. Colorado's Western Slope used to have a booming energy production. We used to have about 112 rigs operating on the Western Slope, and now we have 4. Extreme leftist policies lock up land. They've driven away good paying American jobs and have helped drive up gas prices. With the stroke of his pen, Joe Biden waged an all-out war against American energy production, propping up Vladimir Putin on day 1 of his administration, from shutting down the Keystone XL pipeline, imposing new rules to block pipeline projects, canceling oil and gas leases on millions of acres of land in Alaska and in the Gulf of Mexico, imposing a moratorium on new federal oil and gas leases on federal lands, failing to meet the statutory deadlines for quarterly lease sales, and took countless other anti-energy measures that have contributed to increased gas prices and inflation reaching record levels. Rather than shutting down production here at home and begging Iran and Venezuela and OPEC to produce energy for us, we should be producing it right here and relying on the American roughneck, the hardworking American roughneck, that you are taking food out of their children's mouths to prop up your energy scams. We do it cleaner and better than anyone else. Now, my first question, thank you, witnesses, for being here today, is for you, Ms. Sagama. Thank you for traveling from Colorado to be with us. You discussed the increased bureaucracy around lease suspensions and permit extensions. What can we in Congress do to ensure that these agencies spend their time reducing the current APD backlog, which sits at almost 5,000, versus haggling over these paperwork exercises?
I appreciate the question. You know, just specify that an APD term is for 4 years instead of 2, because right now, when we try to get an extension, we're having to justify it quarterly. So it's a lot of extra paperwork churn. So just make the term 4.
Thank you. Ms. Sagama, we've heard rumblings that the Bureau of Land Management may suspend approving all APDs due to the 10th Circuit's decision last Friday. In your opinion, does the BLM need to do this, or is there a way to address this decision quickly and allow APD approvals?
Yeah, it's really easy to find a NEPA deficiency in court. And in this case, the judge found that BLM didn't consider a carbon budget. There's no law passed by Congress that requires a carbon budget, but BLM could quickly explain that, no, we didn't consider a carbon budget because of that reason I just specified. And, you know, it's an easy corrective NEPA fixed. It shouldn't be affecting any other permits in New Mexico or anywhere else.
That does sound like an easy fix, Ms. Sagama. Now, in your testimony, you touch on the 9,000 unused leases and permits numbered used by the Biden administration last year when blaming producers for high energy prices. Could you explain, please, to us here today why these leases and permits cannot simply be used?
Well, you're never going to operate on 100% of leases. So right now we're at a 66% utilization rate, And so that's a good high number. So if there's about 12,000 non-producing leases, there are 23,000 producing leases. So that's a good mix, just because sometimes economic resources are not found on a particular lease. When it comes to permits, there are other approvals that are necessary for permits, and we have several held up in court cases. So there are various reasons that a permit doesn't get used immediately.
Thank you very much, Ms. Sagama, and thank you so much to the other witnesses for being here. Mr. Chairman, I yield back. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you so much to our witnesses. Thank you for our sector chiefs for being here present with us today. This is the first time in the Biden administration that we have had the privilege to have our Customs and Border Patrol agents here present with us in Washington, D.C. So I appreciate you being here. I would like to ask you both, do you think that you were brought here today to promote white nationalism? Mr. Maudlin?
Thanks for the question, ma'am. I can tell you I absolutely was not brought here for that reason.
Thank you. Chief Chavez?
No, ma'am, I was
Thank
not.
you. Chief Maudlin, compared to 2 years ago, is Border Patrol finding more or less dead bodies of people trying to cross the border?
So within the Tucson sector, because that is my purview, I can tell you that we are encountering more migrants that have died in the
Thank you, Chief
cross.
Maudlin. That is correct, and in fact, nearly 1,400 dead bodies have been found along the southern border since Biden took office. Each year has been a record high and a 300% increase since the Trump administration. Chief Maudlin, do you know border counties that have had to procure mobile morgues just to try to keep up with the increased volume of dead bodies Border Patrol is finding?
Ma'am, I'm unaware of that within the Tucson sector. What I can tell you, though, is that we work very hard to try to prevent any migrant deaths out there. So as I was starting to say earlier, close to 300 EMTs and paramedics, a great ability to lift agents on Blackhawks, get them to people very quickly to prevent
With
that.
all due respect, thank you, Chief Maudlin. Just last year, Culberson County Sheriff Oscar Carrillo was forced to deploy a corpse trolley after finding so many bodies, so many more bodies than in years past. These counties are using their limited resources to clean up Joe Biden's mess. This sheriff stated, quote, "I used to request regular stuff like bulletproof vests. Now I'm asking for more body quotes, end bag." Chief Maudlin, compared to 2 years ago, is Border Patrol arresting more illegal aliens found to have criminal convictions or fewer?
Ma'am, so in terms
More or
of
fewer,
pure,
please, Chief.
Ma'am,
More or fewer?
more.
Thank you. In fact, Border Patrol arrested more than 12,000 last year, up from 2,500 in fiscal year 2020. That's almost a 400% increase. Now, what about terrorists? Is Border Patrol encountering more or less people with records in terrorist screening databases? Chief Maudlin.
Ma'am, my understanding, more commensurate with
Thank
the
you, Chief.
increased flow.
In fact, CBP encountered 98 potential terrorists last fiscal year. That's compared to just 6 during President Trump's entire time in office. Now, Chief Chavez, I've visited your sector. What about known gotaways? Have those increased over the last couple of years, known gotaways?
They have, ma'am.
Yes, I have that information as well. On Biden's watch, there have been over 1.2 million known gotaways, and of course, we don't know the unknown gotaways. Now, Chief Maudlin, would you agree that gotaways included convicted criminals, terrorists, drug traffickers, or even gang members?
Ma'am, as I've stated, I don't think I can suppose
Thank you, Chief.
anything.
Chief Chavez, are you aware prosecuting and imprisoning these any drug trafficking criminals caught by state and local law enforcement comes out of their local budgets?
I am aware that the county and local law enforcement bear the cost
Yes.
of the detention for criminal.
And our local communities are being forced to foot the bill for Joe Biden's border crisis. What about CBP officers committing suicide? Now, I have seen the despair in Border Patrol agents' faces. Their morale is certainly decreased. They are unable to do the job that they swore to do. Would you say that that has increased in the past 2 years? I'll let both of you answer yes or no.
It has, ma'am. In the last 2 years, Border Patrol has had 13 suicides, 5 in RGV, and It's a terrible thing that we experience.
Thank you, Chief. My time is almost up. Chief Modlin, yes or no? Are
Yes,
suicides
ma'am.
up? Yes,
Agree with
thank you.
Chief Chavez.
Unfortunate and disgraceful. And I have one final question. Chief Modlin, you were asked if there was a policy change, if there was laws changing, and that it was possibly, you answered that it was possibly rumors that people were coming here to our country illegally because of something they had heard. But wouldn't you agree that policy did change? Under President Trump, it was catch and deport. And under Biden, it is catch and release into the interior of our country. They are no longer waiting outside of our country for asylum. They are being released into our country on the honor system. And so with that, we are seeing an increase of terrorists, 1,500%, gang members coming across that have doubled, illegal crossings with criminal convictions up 400%, dead bodies being found up to 300%, and CBP suicides at a decade high. So would you agree that the policy did change? And the truth is that there is an invasion happening at our southern border because of this policy change, and it's happening because Joe Biden invoked amnesty and changed the secure border policies that were working for our country, and he won't change it back because Democrats, and this is intentional. In fact, their policy is a success. It's not a failure because this is their intent.
Chair's lady's time has expired, but please feel free to answer the question.
Thank you, ma'am. So I stand by my response. All I know is what we're being told by people that have crossed, and they absolutely unequivocally said they crossed because they felt like law and policy had changed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think our biggest issue with many of these amendments are that there's no clear definition of what these items are, and we're waiting for some bureaucrat to define what these things mean. If it's up to the federal government, up to bureaucrats to define things, then we end up with terms like extremists, domestic terrorists, and they end up targeting conservatives. I mean, if we were wanting to have an additional disclaimer from the government, well, the Vice President of the United States just said that energy rates are down, that people's electric bills are lower and they're able to afford vacations. No, energy is very expensive right now and continues to rise because of the policies implemented by my colleagues on the left and enforced through the stroke of a pen by Joe Biden. And so to have a government disclaimer on something, I don't think is very helpful because it's at whatever political narrative they're trying to promote at that time. And I think it's interesting, the gentlewoman, Ms. Porter, just aligned this with grocery shopping and with the nutritional facts, because there's also issues there. Well, that's a government regulation to have these nutritional facts on the foods that we consume. Well, do you know that if we get beef from Brazil and it's packaged in America, well, you could put a sticker on that that says that its country of origin is America? Well, that's disinformation because the cow was raised in Brazil and brought to America, but just put in a box or in a different box in America, and now we get to put that sticker on there. And then, of course, I mean, we've all seen the arguments with cage-free. That's a government regulation, to have these things on here. Well, your chicken's cage-free. Well, that just means it's not a battery cage. It's still in an enclosure, and probably a really tight one, too. These aren't just free-range chickens on 40 acres, 50 acres. They're still in enclosures, sugar-free, fat-free. You can go through all of these things, and these are from government regulations. So I think with all of this, you can say that government ruins nearly everything. So why have government receive more power to restrict Americans, to give their own definitions, depending on who is in power at that time? And that's the issue that my colleagues over here are having with most of these amendments. It's not the context of the amendments, it's just the broad, how broad they are. And we don't want them later defined. Yes, I'll yield.
Thank you. I just have a quick question. Under this bill, who is going to define, you just have an issue as to who defines misinformation, disinformation. Who's going to define lawful speech?
Well, I think lawful speech is something that's already out there. Free speech is lawful speech. We have free speech here in America.
You don't think that
Chair
there has to be
recognizes Ms. Boebert.
Thank you. When you're throwing these amendments out and you have them very vague and broad, then that's where we have an issue. And we need to have a clear definition before we can consider these things. But lawful speech is already determined. We have freedom of speech, and the federal government interfering in that, colluding with big tech, that is the problem that we have. That's the premise that we're facing, where American citizens have their First Amendment right completely infringed by the federal government colluding with big tech. Thank you. I yield.
From Colorado is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate you holding this important hearing today. With the average price of gasoline nationwide currently sitting at $3.35, and the average hard rock mining project taking 7 to 10 years to go through the NEPA permitting process, clearly we must do more to streamline the permitting process and encourage responsible energy production. And I must just add that I'm not thrilled to hear the remarks from Mr. Squillace, excuse me, and the ranking member. It's coming, whether people like it or not. The Green New Deal, wind, solar, it's coming, whether people like it or not. We're not even going to allow the markets to decide. The markets were deciding with fossil fuels, and it was a reliable and efficient energy source, and then the federal government came in and shut them down and heavily subsidize wind and solar, so-called renewables that are not renewable. And now we hear it's coming whether people like it or not. You're going to learn to like it because the federal government is going to put the restrictions and regulations to force you to have it, and you're going to like it whether you whether you want to or not. Praise the Lord. Look, I'm proud to support both of these well-crafted bills that we're here to discuss today that will do the work that's needed to streamline the permitting process and encourage responsible energy production here in America. I'm also thrilled that the TAP American Energy Act also includes the American Energy Act that I introduced. My bill, H.R. 1067, is important to the people in my district and will help reduce gas prices by providing certainty for energy producers. Now, Chief Operating Officer Knotts, you talk about this in your testimony, but the Biden administration continues to ignore the leasing mandates in the Mineral Leasing Act and the Outer Continental Shelf Lands Act. Will this bill force the administration and future administrations to comply with the law?
Well, it certainly should. Again, thank you for the question. As I said earlier, the laws are there, but the Biden administration has not enforced them, Mineral Leasing Act and OXLA. This bill will require quarterly lease sales, which is very important to get that process both onshore and offshore. And I just want to also stress again how important or how negative the president has been. I can't tell you the impact that the administration is saying no more drilling on federal lands, no more drilling offshore. The president saying again, no ability for the oil industry to provide, to continue to drill, period.
He wants to end fossil fuels.
Has a dampening effect. Has a dampening effect on small producers that we represent to get out there and operate. And one other thing I would say is you're talking about the energy renaissance that happened with hydraulic fracturing. Nobody knew that. So if you're talking about we know what's going to happen, we know the market decided that. Energy producers, independent producers, took huge risks to go down, hydraulically frack, horizontal, and the energy renaissance has happened. Thank God that happened. Thank God that now that we have a situation in Ukraine and elsewhere that people didn't say, oh, we're done. Our producers, American producers, went out and said, we're going to take the risk, small producers, and that's benefited all of us.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Knotts. Now, it was reported yesterday that President Biden was incorrect about his assertions that the industry is sitting on 9,000 drilling permits, according to the BLM. In reality, those numbers are much lower, potentially due to a clerical error, how convenient, or computer system malfunction. Now, Mr. Knotts, you explain to those, will you explain to those in this subcommittee who have echoed those same remarks that Joe Biden said, that the revised number means, what the revised number means, and why the industry might not be able to use a permit immediately upon receipt?
So the numbers were, again, as we talked about 9,000, were by the agency's own admission reduced down to 6,600. Again, that will tell you how unclear the agency is on what's happening. The President of the United States himself used the 9,000 figure,
Correct.
which was wrong. Second of all, many of those approved permits are tied up in litigation, lawsuits from the environmental community, both in New Mexico and Wyoming. Leases are tied up. So as you're talking about leasing, it's really important to understand the tied up in litigation. And then finally, it's not just a spigot that you open up. Once you get a permit, it takes a huge amount of work. This doesn't happen overnight. So we certainly take exception to this idea that you can just turn these projects on and off overnight.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Knotts. My time has expired, and thank you to the witnesses who are here today.
Thank the gentleman from Colorado. The gentleman from Montana is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Appreciate it. My friends across the aisle, when we talk about the cost of energy, choose to ignore the impacts of supply and demand and our domestic production being intentionally reduced by nearly 2 million.
Mr. Chairman. Yes, sir.
I move strike the last word. Oh, excuse me.
Yeah, Ms. Moffett.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Since we brought up COVID, I just want to respond and to remind the majority that COVID did not start under the Biden administration. It started under the Trump administration, and it was Donald Trump who closed businesses. It was Donald Trump who closed schools. It was Donald Trump who mandated masks. It was Donald Trump who came up with the vaccine, which I don't have a problem with, but if you have a problem with it, it was Donald Trump's vaccine. And so when we bring up COVID, we seem to have amnesia of when COVID started, who it started under, right? You guys don't like Dr. Fauci, but it was Donald Trump who listened to Dr. Fauci. And so at the end of the day, you guys want to complain about things that happened under the last 2 years. You're allowed to have valid complaints, but what I'd love to hear from the majority is the criticism of the Trump administration and Donald Trump and the decisions that were made during that administration, which you guys use as talking points to hit the President of the United States over Joe Biden, but he was not in charge when those decisions were made. I yield back.
Will the gentleman yield? I'll respond. You want to hear a response from the majority? I'll be happy to respond.
Chair,
Sure, Mr. Chairman, I will.
Chair,
Thank you very much. You're right. President Trump was in office when the COVID virus was released from a lab in China, from the Wuhan lab. And he tried to make that very clear that this came from China. And reporters regularly dismissed that. They called him a xenophobe because he was just saying where the virus came from. He did not mandate masks. Your president did. Joe Biden did. We were on airplanes, all masked up, forced to be in masks, shut down our businesses, shut down our schools. Governors shut down our businesses and our schools. President Trump was very much in favor of federalism and saying, let the states choose. He didn't make any federal mandates. And there's plenty of vaccine mandates that came from Joe Biden. Ask our service members who have been wrongfully discharged, have not been reinstated, have not received back pay, and now what? If they want to continue to not serve, will they have an honorable discharge? We don't know, because even in the previous NDAA, that language was not strong enough. And so now that's another fight that we still have to have. What about all of our medical workers who are forced to have vaccines? That's the problem with the vaccine, not that it exists. Great, it was created. It's your choice if you want to get the vaccine, if you want to get the booster. It was forced on millions of Americans, and that is where the problem lies.
Would the gentleman yield?
Yes, I yield.
well, he's asked, yeah.
Yes.
Thank you very much, and thank you for yielding, Mr. Motzquist. I appreciate the gentlelady's passion. There are two facts that she should perhaps be alerted to. One is that Donald Trump on more than 20 different occasions defended the performance of the Chinese government, and specifically President Xi, in terms of his treatment of COVID-19, and said he was doing a wonderful job and a great job, and they were working closely and they were constantly in touch. So if there's a problem with the Chinese government unleashing a virus, which has not been proven anywhere, but it certainly could be true, you would have to pin that on your favorite president, Donald Trump, not on Joe Biden. The second thing is President Trump's own special advisor on COVID-19, Deborah Birx, I'm sure you're aware, and I'm sure you've read her book, said that the lethal recklessness of Donald Trump's policies about COVID-19 cost Americans hundreds of thousands of lives. So you don't have to believe anybody on the Democratic side of the aisle. That's Donald Trump's own special advisor on COVID-19. Thank you for yielding, and I happily yield back.
Chair recognize Mr. Moskowitz for final 56 seconds.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'll just close with this. Again, I don't have a problem having the conversation with the majority on what decisions that were made during an emergency that now that the lights are back on and we're no longer in the emergency, that they want to criticize. But that criticism needs to go both ways. It can't just be that COVID started only in the Biden administration and those decisions were made only in the Biden administration. I will have you know, and maybe you're not aware, but that the White House and the president called governors around the country, and the president himself instructed them to close. How do I know that? I was in the room. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Does any other member
And thank you, Director, for being here with us today. On March 1st, 2021, Joe Biden said that it's time for the American people to get back to work. More than a year later, only 1 in 3 federal workers has returned to the workplace since the start of COVID, and far fewer than that right here in Washington, D.C. In fact, a leaked memo that I have here from January 2021 to the then Chief of Staff at the Department of Health and Human Services showed that between 20 and 30% of the department's employees did not even log into work on any given day between March and December of 2020. Mr. Chairman, I do ask for unanimous consent to submit this into the record.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you. Because these bureaucrats have basically joined the pajama party, the federal government has somehow gotten even worse at serving the American taxpayers, from significant backlogs in case management and lengthy response times. These are issues that I deal with on a regular basis with my constituents who are having frustrations with federal agencies. These federal agencies have been unable to process retirement paperwork for our seniors, correct errors on tax returns, and even fulfill requests for veterans to access files in order to access life-saving medical care. Now, Director Ahuja, do you know as of today what percentage or the number of federal employees that have returned to work full-time in person at their agency office?
Thank you, Congresswoman. I've mentioned before I don't have that specific data.
Thank you, Director. So you had mentioned that there is a public report, correct?
The telework report that we issue every year.
Correct. So we've gone through that report, that public report. It's the Remote Telework Enhancement to Enterprise Human Resources Integration Data Files. That number's not in there.
Well, I did mention also that we just released new data variables that we're going to be collecting through the payroll service providers in order to be able to have more specific data.
So are you telling me that federal agencies track this percentage, or they're going to begin tracking the percentage of employees that return to work in person?
Well, the data is there. We just want to be able to bring it into one house and to be able to automate it.
Where is it currently if it's not under one house?
Well, the agencies house that data through their payroll providers, and that is...
And you weren't able to collect those and bring them in before your report was submitted yesterday? Why is this something that's brand new that you're looking into providing?
I think what you're referring to is the memo that we announced that we are actually going to be setting up the collection, and we want to be able to give agencies time.
I just don't understand why OPM, the director, would not know how many federal employees have returned full-time to work in person. Even if other agencies have this information, why don't you have that information? Director, according to the OPM website, it is official policy for the federal employee to receive a lump sum payment for any unused annual leave when he or she separates from federal service, meaning if any employee does not use all of their vacation time, they will receive payments, sometimes totaling multiple thousands of dollars. Now, normal vacation days no longer have to be reported in the traditional sense under agency telework policies, allowing employees to claim that they will be teleworking and instead, well, they're spending all day at a swim-up bar in Cabo. So with over 25% of department employees not logging into work without agency officials or even the director of the OMB noticing, can you tell me, Director Ahuja, are the American taxpayers paying bureaucrats thousands of dollars to vacation under the guise of agencies' telework policies?
Well, Congresswoman, I actually take issue with the characterization that there's a change in policy. I'll tell you at OPM, individuals have to document their hours every pay period. And so I'm not aware of the policy change that you're speaking about.
You're not aware of any employee taking something that one would consider a vacation time and bringing their computer and maybe logging in just a portion of that time or not at all? We have more than 25% of federal employees not logging into work, and they're teleworking.
Congresswoman, I do take issue with the characterization that 25% of individuals are not logging in.
It's in this leaked document right here that we just submitted into the record.
You're basing that from 2020, which was in the last administration, and I can't speak to that particular incident, and I don't know the particulars.
Do you currently know how many employees are logging in for telework? Do you have that number?
Congresswoman, that's not a
So
number that I would
we don't know
have.
anyone who's working full-time, part-time, in-person, telework. We have no idea.
Well, that's based on the agencies and the supervisors and managers, and they would know that.
Do you or do you not oversee personnel in the federal government?
We oversee personnel policy. Agencies manage their employees.
And you have no documentation of what employees are actually working in person or telework?
Agencies manage
I
their
hope that
telework
this
and remote
gets straightened
work
out. I
agreements.
hope that you get reports under one house. And please, do it soon for the sake of the American taxpayer. Thank you, and I yield.
Gentlelady yields back. Chair recognizes Ms. Porter from California for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to start by recognizing
Ranking Member Bush for her opening statement.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. St. Louis and I are here today to have a serious discussion about what energy security looks like for people, not corporations. This hearing is not that discussion. If House Republicans actually cared about preventing an energy and economic crisis from happening, they would commit to investing in renewable energy. Unfortunately, there are no serious proposals being offered. Rising inflation caused by Russia's violent invasion of Ukraine and COVID-19 pandemic-related supply chain shortages, combined with dangerous corporate greed and a reliance on fossil fuels, has left the United States in a tenuous position of expensive, unreliable, and unsafe energy. Let's be clear, the Strategic Petroleum Reserve was precisely created to be tapped in emergencies involving severe shortages of oil. Of course, I believe that the best way to avoid similar challenges in the future is to end our reliance on oil. But there should be no doubt that President Biden employed it explicitly for its stated purpose in an emergency when our nation's families and people needed it most. According to the U.S. Energy Information Administration, gas prices peaked at $4.88 in the Midwest region last year and are now down to $3.24 as of this week. People were struggling to get to doctor's appointments or to keep their heat on, and the Republican Party would have loved to do nothing. While the drawdown of the SPR was necessary to bolster supplies in an emergency, future events can be best ameliorated or prevented by reducing our demand for and our reliance on fossil fuels. But my Republican colleagues have unironically invited for-profit think tank and oil titans whose expertise is in maximizing profits, especially at the expense of our Black, our brown, and our indigenous neighbors' health, safety, and well-being. One of these so-called energy experts is a philosopher who has previously espoused white supremacist views. For instance, in his 2000 college newspaper, he wrote, quote, "The African and American Studies Department has 23 classes. In many of these classes, African culture is presented
Mr. Chairman,
not as
I demand the
inferior."
gentlelady's words be taken down. She just called the witness a white supremacist.
No, I referred to the words, not to the person, not to him, the words.
The gentlelady is referring to the witness's statement and referred to him
words?
as a white supremacist. I would like a
I
parliamentary
did
inquiry
not.
into
The
having
chair-
the
no, excuse
woman's
me.
I did
words
not.
taken down.
The chair recognizes Congresswoman Boebert.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like a parliamentary inquiry into taking down the gentlelady's words, the ranking member's words, for insinuating that our witness made white supremacist statements using his words.
Okay. Okay. The chair cannot take down words that are directed toward a witness, only to other members. All right. Chair recognizes Ranking Member Bush to continue her opening statement.
Mr. Chairman, parliamentary inquiry.
State your inquiry.
Is it appropriate for the ranking members to show respect to the witnesses who are here present in the committee room today?
I think it would obviously be warranted to show respect for any witness.
I would like that sentiment to be expressed and the members to be reminded to show respect to our witnesses who are here today. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield.
Thank you. Chair recognizes Ranking Member Bush.
As I was saying, the African and African American Studies Department, this is the quote, has 23 classes. In many of these classes, African culture is presented not as inferior to Western culture, but as on equal footing with it. In other departments, the same is done with Latin American, Indian, and American Indian culture, end quote. When confronted about these views over 2 decades later, rather than disavow them, he doubled down on this narrative saying, quote, "It has nothing to do with skin color. I was arguing that those cultures overall are inferior to Western culture." We are not inferior to any culture, speaking as a descendant of one of those cultures. This is the witness the Republicans invited to discuss issues of energy security. He came here to promote fossil fuels, which we know are disproportionately harming and killing Black and brown people. Last week, I joined Ranking Member Raskin and all of my Democratic oversight colleagues in calling on oversight Republicans to denounce white nationalism and denounce white supremacy in all its forms. Not one single Republican joined us. So I ask again today, will my Republican colleagues condemn white supremacy and work with us to ensure this committee engages in advancing good and reducing harm rather than perpetuating it? That is respect. Our committee needs to be focused on actions that will help people and prevent financial hurt and pain. Whether we deploy the SPR or we don't, the instability of our energy system will continue if we are reliant on oil. Our committees need safe, reliable, renewable energy, and more investments in public transit. Thank you, and I yield back.
From Colorado, Ms. Boebert.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Almost 3 years of COVID madness, mask mandates, vaccine mandates, a $4.6 trillion spending spree, school, church, statewide shutdowns. This committee is finally committed to getting to the bottom of the $560 billion in taxpayer money that was lost in waste, fraud, and abuse. The GOA estimates that there is still $90.5 billion in COVID-19 relief funds that remain available for obligation and are vulnerable to that same waste, fraud, and abuse. GOA and IGs have identified multiple recommendations to protect against waste, fraud, and abuse that have yet to be implemented by the Biden administration. Instead, they have thrown more money at the problem. Rather than being reactive and spending more money to find money, the federal government should enact policies to ensure that this kind of abuse never occurs again. Media reports have found that payments were made to over 500,000 federal prisoners, Japanese citizens living in Japan, illegal immigrants, and 1.1 million deceased individuals. In addition to this, our office issued an advisory around claims using Social Security numbers filed in multiple states and filed under suspicious email accounts. Now, I know that some of my colleagues have inquired about these Social Security issues that we're having, but Inspector General Turner, if I may, what mechanisms are currently in place for states to identify these suspicious Social Security numbers and identify these instances of fraud before they happen?
I would say IT modernization is one of the keys, but also a lot of the states are using the Integrity Data Hub, which the National Association of State Workforce Agencies are using. Only challenge with that is that that is a volunteer, program, so it's not required. And so therefore, they don't get a chance to do the cross-matching that is needed.
Okay, good to know that that's just volunteer. And are there any specific challenges states are having to access the master death file at the Social Security Administration?
I believe that the IDH as well, that's where they can do that cross-matching, and they do use the
Yes, sir.
master death file.
And it was also mentioned that your office has referred over 23,000 in fraudulent claims that cannot be processed federally back to the states for further action, and you are tracking those. Have any criminal referrals aligned with this been made from any of the IGs? Have there been any criminal referrals issued for the waste, fraud, and abuse?
I'm not, are you saying about from the 23,000 or just in general?
In total.
There's.
So I'm sorry, I know about the 23,000,
Okay.
but over
Yeah.
all of this, have there been any?
Yeah, we've had 1,200 indictments, and we've
Okay.
had 600 convictions.
Incredible, thank you. And Inspector General Shoemaker, with over $76 billion of potential fraudulent PPP and EIDL loans, what is SBA's plan to investigate these cases, and how does your office plan to conduct the oversight for this plan?
Sure. So our investigative work so far has resulted in 793 indictments, 635 arrests, 446 convictions. We've received $20 billion returned from the borrowers in the EIDL program, as well as $8 billion from the financial institutions. We have over 500 cases ongoing at present. We work cooperatively with the DOJ, Joint Strike Forces. We have high success rate in bringing, we bring evidence to the prosecutors. They're willing to take these cases, and the wrongdoers are getting significant sentences, 4 or 5 years.
Thank you very much, Inspector General. And actually, Inspector General Delmar, same question to you. Any criminal referrals, indictments, prosecutions that have taken place?
Yes, ma'am. I don't have the number with me. I can certainly get that for you. We've worked with the Department of Justice, and we've worked with some state agencies as well. We also pursue and encourage civil remedies to recover the funds.
Thank you very much. I appreciate all three of you being here and testifying before this subcommittee today. Appreciate your work and your service, and with that, I yield.
Thank you. Chair recognizes Representative Boebert for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So obviously the day that he took office, Joe Biden unilaterally declared an all-out war on American energy production, from shutting down the Keystone XL pipeline, which has been mentioned on day one, imposing new rules to block pipeline projects, canceling oil and gas leases on millions of acres in Alaska and the Gulf of Mexico, imposing moratorium on new federal oil and gas leases on federal lands, and he single-handedly regulated our communities into poverty. We want to talk about lifting people out of poverty. Well, my communities in my district that I'm proud to represent have been regulated into poverty because these good paying jobs are no longer there. Now we're talking about affordable housing and child care because the good paying jobs are gone. They're not in my district anymore. And so what did Joe Biden do? He helped lead these record high gas prices right before an election by draining the strategic petroleum reserves. He depleted them. He begged our enemies for oil. A lot of this has been brought up today. And Mr. Epstein, I would love to get to you. The Inflation Reduction Act, the IRA, was recently brought up, which is really the Green New Deal. And Mr. Epstein, I'm curious, would the Inflation Reduction Act, with its billions of dollars, hundreds of billions of dollars going towards Green New Deal energy policies, is that going to protect us from a climate emergency?
Thank you. So if you're thinking about emissions, we'll talk in a second about whether there's a climate emergency, but if you're thinking about emissions, there's obviously only one way to reduce emissions if you're talking about CO2 emissions, because it's a global issue, and that is to make low carbon energy globally cost competitive. So anything you're doing just to randomly subsidize the US, fleece taxpayers to make things more expensive or to do these things that can't work on the market, that doesn't accomplish anything at all. So what you need to do is things like liberate nuclear, liberate natural gas, liberate development so we can have things like deep geothermal, but you need real market things. So first of all, the IRA doesn't accomplish anything in terms of globally cost competitive solutions. And in fact, it keeps over-subsidizing solar and wind into the indefinite future, so it's a total mess. Also, this idea of a climate emergency is a falsehood. There is a difference between climate impact and climate emergency. This idea that we're all going to die very soon from climate is empirically false. We're actually safer than ever from climate-related disasters. Fossil fuels have helped us do things like alleviate drought, heat our homes when it's cold, cool our homes when it's hot. Like, fossil fuels have actually made the climate far safer for human beings, so any concern with emissions should be long-term and non-emergency. It's actually this emergency mentality that led Biden to say, I guarantee you we're going to end fossil fuel, and led to all of these catastrophic policies that you're referring to. So what we need is energy freedom, where all forms of energy can compete. And insofar as solar and wind can be cost competitive and actually provide reliable electricity, great, but forcing inferior energy on us is a disaster, and it causes an energy emergency in the name of a phony climate emergency.
Thank you, Mr. Epstein. And I have a simple question for you. Was America energy independent under President Trump's administration?
So it was I would put it as much, much more energy secure. That's how I would put it. Much, much more energy secure. And in part because President Trump was saying to the industry, we are going to leave you free in the future. Whereas I want to quote one of America's leading oil executives, Cody Campbell, who said, yes, Biden's war on the oil and gas industry is driving shortages and high prices. And he cited specifically the Democrats' idea that the need for oil and natural gas is soon coming to an end.
And Mr. Epstein, would you say then America is not energy secure now?
Yeah,
energy secure?
we are less energy secure because we are more and more dependent on unreliable forms of energy, specifically electricity, and we've threatened the fossil fuel industry going forward. And where I live in California is the perfect embodiment, where we said no more internal combustion engine vehicles, and then 5 days later, Newsom said, don't charge your electric car.
Correct. Mr. Epstein, what should the federal government do to help increase our energy security as quickly as possible?
So the first thing is just to apologize. Like, it's really, really important to say we have been in the wrong, and I know that's difficult, but it needs to happen. And then this whole of government thing needs to change, because the root cause is the whole of government attack on fossil fuels and the net zero commitment. I think a first really good action would be to immediately withdraw from the Paris Climate Accords and encourage every other country to do the same. That would be a great action.
Thank you. I think an apology is necessary to the American people, because I do see this as sabotage. But Mr. Epstein, you have illustrated the dangers of energy insecurity and abusing the SPR. Are we making other areas in addressing energy security?
Yeah, so we're making many. I know we're about to be out of time, but we're making many, many other errors. And I would like to offer, particularly to Representative Stansberry, who told several lies about me. If you want to know the truth about me and this issue, I will sign a copy of Fossil Future for you so you can learn the facts.
Great book. Thank you, Mr. Epstein.
Thank you.
Gentlelady's time has expired. Very generous offer, by the way.
Should be delisted. Thank you.
Gentleman's time has expired, and I yield myself 5 minutes. Colorado is at the center of our nation for wolf battles. The objective of folks on the other side of the aisle is eliminating hunting, lock up our lands, further restrict gun rights, and pander to the interest of extreme environmentalists who don't understand our rural way of life. You see, while people of the Denver suburbs and the fake news believe all wolf attacks turn out like a fairy tale and have continuously been shown cute little images of little pups, the reality is much different. And typically when these dangerous predators attack, they kill. And wolves don't just kill animals, they kill people as well. From 2002 to present day, approximately 500 people have been attacked by wolves, with nearly 30 of these attacks resulting in human deaths. This week, I have received many of letters and photos from families. And if you remember as well, back in 2002, one of the wolf killings, it was a 9-year-old boy. He was critically injured in that count, and his friends were swimming near a forest. A 9-year-old boy could have died from this. But I've received many letters, many photos from families in Colorado who have suffered through wolf attacks. These people deserve a voice as the fake news and wolf proponents often try to dismiss their stories and say they never even happened. The first two photos that I have are from Kathy Shoemaker in Jackson, Colorado, who had a calf attacked and killed, where's that one? By 2 wolves. The next 2 photos are from Carlos Anticio in Walden, Colorado. He has a rescue dog here, Scooby-Doo. Well, Scooby-Doo, his cattle dog, and Buster were both killed by wolves. Scooby-Doo had his stomach ripped out and wide open. The next 6 photos that I have are from Don Gittleson, a rancher in Walden, Colorado, who had a heifer and a dog killed by wolf attacks, as well as 2 breed cows seriously injured. These are wolves, Walden, Colorado, causing this kind of harm, causing these deaths. I also have a tragic wolf stories from Donna Sykes and Audrey McQueen of Colorado. This brutally describes tragic wolf attacks and how they occur. I also want to talk about the federal wolf livestock loss demonstration project program. I helped lead the charge to secure millions of dollars at the federal level in legislation signed into law to compensate ranchers for wolf depredations. In September of last year alone, Colorado Parks and Wildlife compensated livestock producers in Colorado for wolf attacks that killed 5 cows, 2 dogs, and 1 calf. In 2022, the federal government doled out $450,000 for wolf depredations. These last 4 photos that I have were sent from Johnny Schmidt, a ranch manager in Walden, Colorado, and these pictures are of a heifer and 3 calves that all died in Walden, Colorado in November as a result of wolf attacks. Without objection, I would like to submit these for the record without objection. A little different being the chair, asking myself. Mr. Gerton, I was surprised to read that the Fish and Wildlife Services opposed my bill. When career officials at your very agency wrote the same 2020 rules reissued by my bill, and when your agency is also defending this wolf delisting through litigation, I would point out to you that the Administration Procedures Act limits courts from reviewing an agency's action if a statute, like the Trust the Science Act, precludes judicial review of such action, so Congress has the authority to do exactly what my bill does. My time has expired, and I yield.
Madam Chair, I would request unanimous consent to enter an article from wolf.org, which does a little deeper dive into some of the data you just cited, noting that of the 26 fatal wolf attacks around the world during that 20-year period, there was only one in the United States.
Without objection. I want to thank the witnesses for their valuable testimony and the members for their questions. The members of this committee may have some additional questions for the witnesses, and we will ask you to respond to those in writing. Under Committee Rule 3, members of the committee must submit questions to the subcommittee clerk by 5 p.m. on Tuesday, March 28th. The hearing record will be open for 10 business days for these responses. If there is no further business.
Thank you. The chair recognizes Ms. Boebert for her 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, it's interesting hearing the rhetoric from the other side of the aisle. I used to say we don't differ in our hearts. We differ in data. No one wants to see children injured or even lose their lives. However, especially since serving in Congress, I've seen that Democrats do differ in their hearts because they're doing nothing to save lives in the womb. We had a Born Alive Act where one Democrat voted in favor of a full-term baby who is being aborted and survived that abortion, would be born alive, and then issued medical care to save that child's life. So we do differ in our hearts. I have not seen my Democrat colleagues defend innocent life, but they want to use these talking points of children in tragic, horrible scenarios as a political pawn to regulate law-abiding citizens. Now, for far too long, rogue politicians and partisans at the ATF have really run amok, infringing and trampling on the Second Amendment, the rights of the American people. This shall not be infringed, period. There's no comma after shall not be infringed. And it's trampled on by the federal government, by the states and local governments on a regular basis to disarm Americans, to make them subjects rather than citizens. And I stand by the statements that I made because this is to protect the people from a tyrannical government, and it's for self-preservation. This is to defend yourself, your life, which is so valuable. But anyone remember, since we are talking about the ATF, and Mr. Chairman, I actually second Mr. Gates's comments. I would love to have the ATF in here so we can actually question them on this rule. But do any of you remember Project Gunrunner and Operation Fast and Furious? Yeah, the fact that the ATF allowed 1,000, no, more than that, thousands of guns to end up in the hands of Mexican cartels and criminal organizations, and they lost thousands of these traced firearms. And then one of these guns was used to kill border agent Brian Terry, all through some brilliant government program. And it's absolutely outrageous. If you think the ATF is going to be successful in this, making millions of Americans felons through this rule that is an overreach of the separation of powers. You've heard it from the witnesses today who don't necessarily agree with my stance. Mr. Wilcox says that it's us that make the law. Congress makes the law, not bureaucrats. And they're seeking to make millions of Americans felons with this rule. Now, what happened with Fast and Furious, with these traced guns that they lost, thousands of them? The records in question, well, a judge found that they were not covered by privilege and that they were supposed to be released to the American people. Well, what happened to those records? That's right. Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats ended the House lawsuit when they took control in 2019 and further buried this scandal. Absolutely shameful. As the National Shooting Sports Foundation has pointed out, in just the last 5 years, ATF, under political pressure, has at least on 3 occasions, through administrative fiat, changed long-standing positions to declare products lawfully sold in full view of the ATF and in reliance upon ATF classification letters to now be illegal and/or regulated under the National Firearms Act. ATF bureaucrats are not only ignoring the direction of Congress, they are literally ignoring the law and trying to rewrite it themselves. A complete separation of powers. And I apologize, I did have some questions for the witnesses, and I do thank you all for being here and providing testimony. But hearing this on the other side and then just realizing that we differ in data as well as in our hearts because we do want to protect innocent lives. That is why we support the Second Amendment. It is your right to defend yourself, and we will always speak up to defend life. Thank you. I yield.
Chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Colorado, Ms. Boebert, for 5 minutes for her question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's clear that far-left policies driven by progressive D.C. Council members are having a deteriorating effect on education standards, rising crime, and increased financial instability in our nation's capital. Last Congress, Democrats only had one single hearing with a D.C. Council member witness, and it was related to their pursuit of statehood, not actual oversight. Mr. Allen, you stated public safety is a priority for you, and police are essential to reducing crime, yet your policies restrict and weaken law enforcement officers' ability to keep the public safe. You demand more help from police in tweets like this one, yet you strip law enforcement's funding with budget squeezes. Mr. Lee, how much was the Metropolitan Police Department's operational budget cut from 2020 to today?
It's my understanding it's roughly $25 million.
So the statistics I have, Mr. Lee, from the DC Fiscal Policy Institute state that from 2020 to current, MPD's operational budget has been cut by more than $61.5 million. Mr. Allen, you even called to reduce MPD's budget, as we've heard today, by $15 million in 2020 after the Antifa-led George Floyd riots. Sir, you are defund the police. Chairman Mendelson, you stated that there is not a crime crisis in D.C.
Correct.
I would disagree. Mr. Allen, you even seconded the chairman's statements today and went as far to say that D.C. is strong and vibrant. Do you stand by that comment? Do you stand by seconding those remarks? The chairman's already stood by his remarks with his response.
The District of Columbia is incredibly strong and vibrant, yes.
Do you agree that there is not a crime crisis in Washington, D.C.?
As I outlined in my testimony, we've seen reductions in both violent crime and property crime, except for two main categories.
I would disagree. So that's very troubling. Let's start with a few statistics.
Sure.
From 2022 to 2023, sex abuse cases increased by 110%.
To 38, a total of 38.
From 110%, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
That is alarming. Even 1% is alarming and should not be happening, especially when you were cutting MPD's funding and limiting them to protect people from these sexual assaults.
Congresswoman, I'm just trying
2022,
to...
reclaiming my time, sir. It's my time. 2022 to 2023, homicides in D.C. increased by 23%. 2022 to 23, carjackings, not car thefts, carjackings increased by 108%. Chairman Mendelson, do you still stand under oath and state that there is not a crime crisis in Washington, D.C.?
Yes, because if you look at carjackings,
It's remarkable.
for example,
Absolutely
let's
remarkable.
look at robberies overall.
I'd like to talk about...
Robberies are down.
Thank you. Mr. Allen, based on these statistics, I would like to talk to you about some other things that are going on here in Washington, D.C., specifically an initiative that you led. In November of 2022, you led the charge to reform D.C.'s crime laws. Is that correct?
I chaired the committee that proposal came
You
through.
led this charge, yes, sir. And these changes are now law here in DC, correct?
Do you mean the revised criminal code?
Yes,
No, those are not the law.
those are not the law. With
You
The
overturned-
revised
you
criminal
overturned them.
code was rejected by,
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman, I'm talking to Mr. Allen.
Yes,
Mr.
ma'am.
Allen, did you or did you not decriminalize public urination in
No, we did not.
Washington, D.C.? Did you lead the charge to do so?
No, the revised criminal code left that as a criminal charge.
Did you lead the charge to decriminalize public urination in Washington, D.C.?
No, ma'am. That in the
Did you
revised
ever
criminal
vote
code
in favor of decriminalizing public urination in Washington, D.C.?
The revised criminal code that was
Did
passed by
you
the
ever
council
support?
kept it as a criminal offense.
And you support this? Criminal,
I voted for it, yeah.
you voted to keep it as a criminal offense.
That's correct. The full council did.
We have records that show that you were in favor of removing that criminal offense and allowing public urination.
No,
Is that something that you intend to pursue in the future?
No, the legislation you're referring to that came from the Criminal Code Reform Commission changed public urination from a criminal to a civil offense. The council then changed that to maintain it as a criminal offense at the request of the mayor.
Thank you. I yield.
Recognizes Congresswoman Boebert for her questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Today we're here to conduct some oversight on the Biden administration's policies that are regulating our communities into poverty. The Biden administration's all-out war on domestic American energy has resulted in record high inflation crisis that has shifted the cost of Joe Biden's multi-trillion-dollar spending spree to the American taxpayers. While my colleagues on the other side of the aisle want to play the blame game, they seem to be pointing at the finger at everyone but themselves. It's really unfortunate to hear energy crisis stories, energy poverty stories, where a mother has to choose between feeding her family or paying the electric bill. But that's where more than 20 million Americans are right now because of Joe Biden's energy policies that he enforced on Americans January 20th, 2021, where we were energy secure, and he completely surrendered that energy security. This week, House Republicans are pushing back against the left's anti-American, anti-energy policies to pass H.R. 1 to put us back on track towards energy independence and, in turn, reduce inflationary pressures and lower costs for families. Dr. Paul, in your recently released paper, An Economics Case for Restrictive Supply-Side Policies, you advocate for nationalizing the United States oil and gas industry. Do you still agree with that statement?
Yes, in that research paper, we highlight 10 policies that would facilitate
So let me get this straight, Dr. Paul. So you support a communist-style takeover of our oil and gas industry? Because that's exactly what this is, nationalizing our oil and gas industry.
The majority of countries around the globe that have substantial fossil fuel reserves have public ownership of those reserves.
This
so that
is
they
a
can
communist-style
manage it
takeover, and we've even heard from my colleagues on the other side of the aisle that they never want to invest in fossil fuels and the infrastructure of it here in America again, which is quite alarming. Dr. McPherson, prices for heating American homes rose by more than 27% in the past year. And in my home state of Colorado, we had a very cold winter, which means these increased costs hit even harder for the people that live in my district, in Colorado's 3rd district. Do you think that the Biden administration's proposal to place a ban on gas stoves nationwide will reduce energy prices for people in my district?
No, it's going to force them to, unfortunately, have to purchase a new stove if that were to come to pass.
Yes, and we've seen this administration make other extreme proposals for families concerned about energy costs, including Mayor Pete, who had the nerve to say that families concerned about high gas prices should just shell out $55,000 for an electric vehicle. So we have some politicians saying, you know, just go buy brand new electric appliances. Others saying, completely ditch your car and get an electric vehicle. Now, Dr. McPherson, do you think that simply buying New electric vehicles, as Mayor Pete recommended, is a realistic energy solution for American families living month to month and already struggling to pay their bills?
There are hidden inflationary effects within electric vehicles, which in the right place, in the right context, for the right people, are excellent. But we have to remember, to fill up an electric vehicle at the moment, it takes about 30 minutes or so to fill up a tank, so to speak. You can get about 170 miles out of that. But if you've got kids, for example, you've got a family, you've got somewhere to be, you've got to be at work, that half an hour is going to add up. Now, if you're trying to transport freight, for example, across the United States, half an hour every time to fill up is going to add up. Now, that's either going to be reflected in workers' wages, because they're going to demand more, because that time and their time should be compensated, so that'll be inflation, or workers won't be compensated for all that time that adds up. There are hidden inflationary effects there we need to think seriously about.
Thank you, Dr. McPherson. And we've seen states like California say that we want to ban electric vehicles by 2035, and then the next week saying, hey, please don't charge your electric vehicles because our grid cannot handle this. With this, there's a lot of talk of decarbonization going on. I'm pro-forest management, which would certainly help with the reduce of carbon emissions that are emitted with the catastrophic wildfires. And I would encourage the witnesses to also just consider the fact that these solar panels require mining to be done in China-owned mines in the Congo for that cobalt where that child and slave labor is being used. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield.
Chair recognizes Congresswoman Brown for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Now, I have to admit, I'm a little confused as to why we're having the same hearing again. We held an almost identical hearing just 3 weeks.
Ms. Boebert from Colorado.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to Comptroller Dodaro for joining us today. It is this committee's responsibility to investigate the root and root out causes of waste, fraud, and abuse and mismanagement. Noticeably, this year's report indicated that the Department of Health and Human Services leadership and coordination of public health emergencies, even though COVID is over, and the unemployment insurance system, it was added to the high-risk list after the Biden administration has continued to fumble the ball when it comes to responsibly managing taxpayer dollars regarding COVID management. Comptroller Dodaro, for some background information, what are some of the ways that certain agencies and programs are added to the high-risk list?
Yeah, we consider a number of factors. One, we do ongoing work at GAO all the time across all areas of the federal government. So we look at our institutional knowledge of these issues. We consult each inspector general lists what they believe the top management issues are in each of their individual agencies across government. So we consult that. We consider the amount of money that's involved. There has to be at least $1 billion. And we look at a lot of qualitative factors as well, the impact on public safety, for example, and other matters.
Thank you. The high-risk list this year included one very notable addition, the Department of Health and Human Services leadership and coordination of public health emergencies. Can you elaborate on their failures of this program?
Yes. I'll ask Jess Farb, who's our expert in the healthcare area.
Thank you for the question.
Yes, ma'am.
So we looked at HHS's response to public health emergencies over decades. So not just the most recent emergency that we're all familiar with, but response to Zika, response to natural disasters, responses to Ebola. And so looking at that, we found that HHS did not have a number of things in place that would have helped with this response, including understanding roles and responsibilities, the capacity of their partners, communicating clearly with the public, being transparent about actions that need to be taken. So there were a number of things that we observed over time across multiple public health emergencies that allowed us to sort of come to the conclusion that they needed to be added to the list.
Yeah, and I want to keep it visible to the American public and to the Congress, because I don't think we're anywhere near as prepared for the next emergency as we need to be.
So have these leadership failures at HHS contributed to other, it sounds like it does, other health emergencies like the baby formula shortage, the crisis at the border, and the several other natural disasters that took place just last year?
HHS is a very complex department, as we all know, and having multiple components that both need to act independently but also work together. And we were talking about this earlier, how agencies need to coordinate not only across the government but also even within the department. And this is a case with HHS that they need to do more coordination within the department to respond.
The report found that the GAO has consistently found deficiencies in HHS's ability to lead the country's preparedness, as mentioned, and response for more than 10 years, which is quite literally their job to do. According to a report published in January of last year, you identified 246 total recommendations for improving federal operations at HHS alone. How many of your recommendations has the Biden administration implemented?
I believe we'll have to get back to you with an answer on that for the record. I don't know off the top of my head how many they've implemented, but they have implemented some recommendations. How many of that total number, I can't give you the number today.
Yeah, and I would say, you know, HHS is one of the agencies that has a relatively lower percentage of implementing our recommendations than is a norm across the federal government. So we're trying to work to increase that, and whatever help we can get from the Congress, we'd appreciate.
Thank you. I look forward to assisting in that and hearing that we have bipartisan support and getting Congress to act to assist you in that. I think we should put that as one of our priorities here. Another notable addition to this list is the unemployment insurance system. In your report, you indicated this addition is largely due to large amounts of fraud and improper payments, which have come at a huge cost to taxpayers, of course. Did the rate of these errors in unemployment insurance systems increase throughout the 53-week extension from this administration?
It's been going on since during the entire pandemic, yes. Tom, would you like to add?
Yeah, the improper payment rate went up. It's now at 22%, but that doesn't include the pandemic unemployment assistance program, where we expect that the improper payment rate is higher than that.
Thank you. My time has expired, and I yield. Thank you for your answers. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mayor Bowser, is the District of Columbia more dangerous during your tenure?
Congresswoman, as you have heard, we have experienced over the last 10 years decreases in violent crime, all categories of crime. You also heard me talk about in my testimony, especially in the last 3 years, being very concerned.
What about since last year, Mayor?
What about it?
Is it more dangerous this year than it was last year?
I'm going to ask the chief to give you the data.
I'm asking you, Mayor, because I see the crime is up 27%. That doesn't sound like a decrease to me. Violent crime is up 13%. And in 2020 and 2021, the city recorded more than 200 homicides in consecutive years for the first time in 20 years. So is Washington, D.C. more dangerous now that you're in office?
The nation is more dangerous with more guns and more violent
We're
crime.
talking about Washington, D.C. here, and we have also seen that the police budget has been cut, $15 million in 2020, Mayor. Do you think that this contributes to an increase in crime?
I think a lot of things have contributed to increases in crime across the country.
What about in Washington, D.C.? Do you think that the $15 million budget cut to MPD in 2020 caused an increase in crime here in the District of Columbia?
I think that we need to have 4,000 police officers over the course of the last several years.
So you want more police officers?
Yes.
Well, in the past, you've hired on average 300 new police officers each year, but in 2022, you hired 103. That's 200 less, and now you're advocating for more police officers after cutting their budget and hiring 200 less police officers.
I've advocated for more police every day as mayor of the District of Columbia. When I became mayor, we were facing a retirement bubble, and we set a course at that time for hiring and retention.
Do you believe that Washington, D.C. would be safer and more secure if you hired more police officers rather than decreasing the number of recruitment by 200?
We're not decreasing recruitment, but we are facing, as cities in in police departments around the country less interest in joining police
Why do
departments.
you think that is? Do you think that
think
our police officers have been demonized because of the rhetoric that is flowing from this city and many other cities across our nation?
I think that policing is a tough job.
I would agree.
It's a job that has grown tougher over the years. And I think that
Particularly, when do you think it became more tough? Maybe when they were attacked for doing their jobs, protecting citizens? When they lost their funding?
Congressman, if I'm allowed to speak, I'll
Yes, ma'am.
answer you, but I'm not going to talk over you. And so it has been my experience in the last 8 years that we have had to use more incentives, and we have investigated and researched what it's going to take to attract young people to come into policing. One thing that we have done in the district, for example, is to create a police academy that we're very proud of. Chief Conti, in fact, joined the police academy when he was 17 years old and rose through the ranks to be chief
I don't
of
need to hear
police.
about childhood issues here.
Well,
So,
this is how we get
Do you think
how
that
we get
defund the
police.
police signs around District of Columbia and advocating for this
I
is
didn't advocate to
incentivizing?
defund the police.
But you did defund them.
I
$15
did-
million
I did
budget
not-
cut.
I
A
did
$15
not
million
defund the
budget cut
police.
in 2020. So, Madam Mayor, what would you say to the law-abiding citizens here in Washington, D.C., who, because of policies you've supported, are unable to defend themselves with this rise in crime? Crime being up 27%.
Congresswoman, I don't have to come to here to talk to you, to talk to the residents of the District of Columbia. I talk to them daily. I have press
And what do you
conferences.
say to these law-abiding
I'm in
citizens?
What I tell them is that as their mayor, regardless of what's happening nationally, regardless of what's happening in our very complicated criminal justice system, as their mayor, I am charged with making it work. And if that
Is it
means
working?
it is, I am charged with making it work. And what I have
Do you think that you're doing a good job with that? Because I'm seeing that crime is up, violent crime is up, homicides are up, police funding is down, police recruitment is down. So is it working?
Every day, we approach any vexing issue in our city, crime being among them, police recruitment being
Madam
among
Mayor, my time is up, but you know exactly what you need to make Washington, D.C. safer. You know that you need more police officers. You know that you need more
heard me
funding.
say
You know
that.
that you need policies that allow law-abiding
And you heard me say
law-abiding
that.
citizens, thank you, ma'am, it's my time, law-abiding citizens to be able to protect themselves in their own home and defend them.
Ms.
You
Boebert,
know
it
it,
sounds
and
like
you wanted
you
to be a
heard
part
my
of the
opening
culture
statement.
war of the BLM 2020
Yeah.
riots,
It
rather than
sounds like
protecting
you
and
heard
defending
my
the police
opening
and the
statement.
citizens in Washington,
And you're
D.C.
repeating it.
And my time has expired.
And I'm
Thank you, Madam
happy to
Mayor.
repeat it as well. And what we have said, Mr. Chairman, if you would permit me, in that I was overtalked much of that 5 minutes, is that we have been very focused on how to make sure we have a policy environment that supports a safe city, but also that we approach it not just with law enforcement, but with opportunities and with prevention.
Your policies are clearly making your city more dangerous, not safer.
And the lady's time has expired. Chair.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Colorado, Ms. Boebert, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our witnesses for being here today. Director Stone Manning, so in Mesa County, one of the great counties that I represent, we have been waiting more than 5 years for a particular parcel. We've been waiting for the BLM to sell this 31.1 acre parcel of land in Clifton. It would be sold at a fair market value, and it's on the disposal list currently. And I just am curious if this is an issue that's on your radar.
Congresswoman, you just put it there, and I commit to you that I will look into it.
I would love to work with you on this. This is a big deal for my constituents in Mesa County. It's something, I've toured the site and have legislation to support this. So if there's something that we could find to work together on, this parcel of land would be a great place to start. Now, my colleagues in this committee and in the House, they have claimed numerous times during debate that wilderness designations don't prevent or restrict active forest management. I'm curious if you agree with those sentiments.
Congresswoman, we do manage wilderness differently than we manage the front country, but we do have tools at our disposal.
So what are some of those tools? Because particularly mechanical thinning is something that's prevented in wilderness areas, and we are reduced down to old, long, two-man hand saws. Do you think that that is enough to manage our forests with 6 billion standing dead trees in the West?
That and prescribed fire, I think, is what is necessary.
A
in
handsaw and
wilderness.
prescribed fire rather than mechanical thinning. So as a follow-up, if we're serious about actively managing our forests, and I believe that we all are to some degree, we just have different ideas on how to get there, we have to prevent these catastrophic wildfires. And certainly prescribed burns is one great way to do that, and forest cleanup and reducing the fuels that are on the ground. But would you say that we need more mechanical thinning on a larger scale in these overgrown areas?
Congresswoman, we are focusing that work with great intent around the wildland-urban interface in order to protect people and communities. Last year, we did about 1 million acres of mechanical treatment. This year, we've got a goal of about 1.3.
And are you intending to increase the use of mechanical thinning?
Around communities, yes, we are. We're focusing the work in places that.
Well, so in my district, we don't have as many of those communities that would be affected, but we certainly have areas that my colleagues are trying to designate wilderness and already have, and that prevents us from actively managing our forests. And I believe that the greatest way to do this on a larger scale is to increase mechanical thinning. We have to reduce the 234 million acres of forest that's currently considered high risk for these dangerous and catastrophic wildfires. So that's another thing that I would love to work with you on, because we have to be good stewards of the land that we've been given, and actively managing our forests is one way to do that. Now, mineral lease sales, moving on, are required by law to take place at least quarterly. Accordingly, there should have been at least 9 rounds of lease sales in the past 2 years. With gas prices as high as they are, and there should have probably been more than 9, how many rounds of onshore lease sales has the BLM held in the last 28 months?
Congresswoman, thank you for the question. We held a lease sale in fiscal year 22. That was 5 sales, if I'm remembering properly. We have sales now, regular sales coming starting this month. But I think that
how many sales are scheduled for this month? Because I'm showing that the answer is 1. We've had 1 lease sale, and the BLM is not currently complying with law here, and truly hurting domestic energy production. So how many sales do you have planned?
Congresswoman, oil and gas production is at an all-time high on federal lands, and oil and gas corporate profits are at an all-time high. 14% of...
So I live in a drilling community, and I can testify that we have been regulated into poverty with our oil and gas production because politicians get into office and virtue signal and make these false claims about our good, clean energy production. And unfortunately, it is hurting my constituents. And so if we could work together to increase these sales and increase future production, I think that would help the future revenues for essential services like schools, roads, firefighting, and all of the things that we care about so much. Director Stone Manning, I'm over my time, and I thank you so much for...
The gentlewoman from Colorado, Ms. Boebert, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Postmaster General DeJoy, you testified that 98% of the nation's population is receiving their mail and packages in 3 days or less. What percentage of mail is delivered on time in rural areas in America?
I would say our overall standard on first-class mail is to the service standard is about 92-93% right now. Marketing mail is 95%.
Okay, those are pretty high numbers. So I asked that because I've heard from my constituents over the past few years in rural America who are receiving terrible service from the Postal Service. I know a lot of issues have been brought up today, and we're working to get solutions with you. So thank you so much for being here and providing answers so we can try to work through this. But the struggles that we're seeing are veterans and seniors not receiving important prescriptions in a timely manner. Postal positions have been unfilled for long periods of time. Local post offices have been closed or had extremely limited hours. Packages have been seen piling up in lobbies. Some people did not receive a single piece of mail for 3 weeks in my district. Wait times exceed an hour in some places. And to make matters worse, extremely poor customer service is something that I'm hearing a lot of. Colorado City, it's south of Pueblo, went without its contract post office for approximately 6 weeks after the contractor who ran it quit because the Postal Service was not honoring his contracts. People in my district literally had to drive 30 minutes to Pueblo to get their mail, and I think you would agree that these things are unacceptable. Now, Postmaster General DeJoy, an estimated 15,000 rural pharmacies were forced out of the Department of Defense Health Agency's Cigna Express Scripts reimbursement plan, and this has caused rural veterans across Colorado's 3rd District to rely solely on the Postal Service to receive their prescriptions. This has caused veterans to go without these prescriptions, most of which are necessary for the quality of their life, for upwards of weeks, and due to the delay in this delivery. Now, this is not only happening in our rural areas such as Cortez, Los Animas, Del Norte, Meeker, Rangeley, and just about all of these mountain communities, but it is even happening in major populated areas such as Grand Junction, Colorado, and in Pueblo, as mentioned. What steps are you taking to ensure that Postal Service no longer leaves our veterans going weeks without important quality of life prescriptions?
So specifically in Colorado, when I was made aware of the issue and I met with your 2 senators, we put, and we're doing this in all the areas, making, as I said
I'm sorry, when did you meet with the senators? If that's something you could recall.
A month ago.
Okay.
2 months ago.
Okay.
But it really was from the January and beginning of February activity that was out there. I put a SWAT team out into the area, and we put 12 or 13, moved 12 or 13 carriers up. We reestablished contracts, highway contracts in the area. We put additional management in I think 8 or 9 different locations around the mountain area, and we got the service flowing back on time. And as I said earlier, there's a lot of damage that was done, and then coming through the pandemic, these remote retail areas are the ones that are the longest for us to get back and the toughest for us to get back into stable operating condition. And we're working on it. I think most of those areas in Colorado are significantly better than they were before. I watch the days to deliver missed mail delivery points and so forth. So I think, have you had any recent?
Yes, so we have had ongoing issues that have been brought to our attention, and specifically there was a period in time in October of 2021 when I reached out to you personally, and I was denied a meeting that we couldn't get this.
Reach out to me?
Yes, I did. And this was just about the unacceptable service that we were seeing in Levita at a post office in my district, and a government relations representative from Washington, D.C. responded and said a lie, stating that staffing issues were not impacting operating hours, and they absolutely were. So I am glad that you reached out to the senators and spoke for them. I'm grateful to hear what you are expressing to this committee about the commitments that you are making to address these issues, and I hope to work with you personally in the future and with your staff as well, because this is something that's very important to all Americans. So thank you so much for your time, and I yield back.
Thank you.
Gentleman.
Thank you. Chair recognizes Ms. Boebert from Colorado for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Duane, I think it's been mentioned many times here today, and I apologize that I wasn't here for a lot of it. We have other committees going on as well, but we've seen an increase in prices for medication and treatments over the past few years. You would agree?
Yeah, I would absolutely
Yes.
agree with that.
And I think that you all have elaborated as far as the why, and you're welcome to elaborate more if you'd like. But do you see that patients leave their prescriptions at pharmacies because they can no longer pay for it?
They absolutely do in my pharmacy, yes. That happens more than should make anyone comfortable.
I actually have a fun little story. My staff is probably going to talk to me about this later, but I left a prescription at a pharmacy once. I went to get birth control, and I was there at the counter and went to pay for it, and the price was very, very high. I said, wow, is this a 3-6-month prescription? No, ma'am, this is 1 month. And I said, it's cheaper to have a kid. And I left it there, and now I have my third son, Caden Boebert, and so I'm actually, it was turned out to be a really great thing, but I personally experienced that when times were tough. But thank you so much for your indulgence there, and talk to the team about that comment later. Excuse me, please state your name for me.
Isasi.
Isasi, thank you. Mr. Isasi, now you state that drug launch prices have increased 20% per year from 2008 to 2021. Other than inflation, what other factors caused this price hike?
Drug makers' greed.
And you state that there are on average 125 patient applications per drug that extends their monopolies and blocks competition up to 4 decades. What kind of distinctibility do these patients have from others to make them patentable?
Right. They're exceeding their patent. Their patent was supposed to last 9 years, maybe 11 years, if it's or 12 years, and they're going for 40 years because they're just suing their way into greed.
And how could we end patent abuse without restricting someone's patentability?
I mean, this is so important. By really focusing in on this kind of greed, what we're actually doing is ending drug companies' ability to make money by just extending the existing intervention. We want them to stop making money at the 9-year and go find something else. And every year we let them keep making money from that same drug. We are killing innovation. So it's critically important.
Thank you. And Dr. Atkins, as an oncologist, can you give us an example in which PBMs have obstructed your patients from getting the medications that you've prescribed to them?
We could stay here all day, but I'll just give one.
Yes, ma'am.
Particularly what I mentioned
Doctor.
earlier in my statement that I wrote a prescription on October 14th. I saw the patient 2 weeks later. He still did not have the medication. Asked him what had happened because we thought we could fill it at my dispensary, my practice. I found out from my pharmacist that our dispensary sent the prescription someplace else, and then the patient's PBM, CVS Caremark, took the prescription, told the patient, we haven't heard from your doctor. And we're like, that's not true. We've been going back and forth. Anyway, the patient got his medication on December 1st. So this happens very frequently.
Right, which presents consequences to your patients.
Definitely,
Yes. Thank you very much, Doctor. Mr. Baker, on May 16th, your company changed the name and has a new tagline of patients over profits. What prompted this change?
Yeah, I think it really falls to a lot of the conversation here today. We think you can run a very viable organization that drives to highest clinical quality, lowest net cost, and not focus on profit being your sole endpoint. So we really want to make sure that everything that we do and everybody we work with knows that patients come first. And you know what? This is a hundreds of billions of dollar a year industry. There's plenty of money left over to create a market-driven solution that still
Agreed.
creates good profit for people.
Yes, and in your opinion, do you oftentimes see PBMs using rebates or promote expensive brand drugs even if they don't work as well on patients?
We do. You can publicly available pull a lot of PBM formularies and continually see brand name drugs that have lost patent exclusivity that are now generics, but those are still the drugs that are preferred on those formularies.
Thank you very much, Mr. Baker. And Dr. Atkins, do you mind explaining the protocol of step therapy or fail first?
Sure, fail first. One example I gave are the antiemetic medications for nausea and vomiting for chemotherapy. There are certain drugs we want to use with certain chemotherapy because some drugs cause more nausea than others. So I may want to use drug X, and the PBM will say, no, you have to use drug number A, and if the patient fails that by getting really, really sick, then I can go back to the drug I want to use. That's one example of step therapy or fail first.
So you've seen patients be affected
Oh,
by
yes.
it? Yes. Do you think that patients are being failed by PBMs and their insurers?
I think they are. I mean, as a physician, my job is to take care of patients the best way I know how. And when I give a recommendation or write a prescription, and then someone else who does not do what I do, does not have my training, stands in the way of me taking care of my patients, that's definitely failing the patient.
Thank you. Well, I'm very excited to have had this hearing today. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to my colleagues on the other side of the aisle. It sounds like that we have a lot of things that we could work together on. Thank you so much to our witnesses here for providing your testimonies and your expertise here in this committee room today. I hope that we can provide solutions to help you help your patients and to get this problem that we all see as very detrimental under control. Thank you so much. I yield.
Thank you. Chair recognizes Ms. Crockett from Texas.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to each of you for being here and being willing.
The amendment she cares to testify on.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I filed 7 amendments to the so-called Fiscal Responsibility Act. These amendments rightfully place the conservative policies we voted for in the Limit, Save, Grow Act into this current bill. Last month, House Republicans did our job while the Senate sat idly by and Joe Biden continued to do nothing. We did our job and we passed a bill. We voted to responsibly raise the debt ceiling in exchange for enacting pro-policies and real spending cuts. Our bill saved taxpayers $4.8 trillion and included real reforms. This bill, unfortunately, gives Joe Biden a blank check to sink the American people and spend trillions of dollars without any caps. The American people will be sent further into debt after this administration and a Democrat-controlled Senate required Americans to spend $10 trillion more over the next 10 years than we previously estimated to spend. My Amendment 34 inserts Section 101 of the Limit, Save, Grow Act to set discretionary spending limits. These changes limit future spending by returning discretionary spending to pre-pandemic levels while maintaining a strong national defense and protecting Medicare and Social Security. My Amendment 35 strikes Sections 231, 322, and 323 and inserts a Lower Energy Costs Act to increase domestic energy production and exportation, reduce regulatory burdens, and reform permitting across all sectors of the economy to result in $3.4 billion in savings. We should make important reforms to NEPA for the first time since 1982, and I'm glad this bill attempts to do that. However, it does not go far enough. As currently written, the bill only includes minimal changes to the current permitting process. This bill still allows for unnecessary litigation that actually holds up these projects to proceed. These provisions also disproportionately benefit renewable energy, which is very unreliable. H.R. 1 includes the permitting reform America needs in addition to reducing gas prices by providing certainty for responsible energy production and preventing baseless litigation. My Amendment 37 strikes Titles 1 and 2 of Division C and inserts reasonable work requirements on SNAP, TANF, and Medicaid to lift people out of poverty, grow the workforce, and reduce federal entitlement spending, likely resulting in $120.1 billion in savings. More Americans are receiving welfare benefits than ever before. During COVID, Congress expanded welfare, and this administration campaigned on going even further by creating new entitlement programs. There are still nearly $10 million unfulfilled in job openings across the country. This is almost 2 jobs for every unemployed person. This labor shortage continues to affect everything from small businesses to large-scale construction and manufacturing projects. And I don't see a clock. Do I have a time limit here? Yeah. Okay, I don't see a clock.
No.
No? Okay. I was going to skip ahead.
There's a vote on the floor now.
My Amendment 38 inserts the REINS Act to require congressional approval of any federal regulation that has an economic effect of at least $100 million, spurring economic growth and reducing the burden on small businesses and families. The GOP majority has been empowered to hold the Biden administration accountable and demand transparency by revealing just how much Biden's executive orders are costing American families and small businesses. And unfortunately, in the current bill that we are currently debating, the administrative pay-go allows the director of OMB to suspend any of these regulations at any time. It's kind of like the fox guarding the hen house here. It is far past time to take our Article I authority back from the executive branch and stop spending money we don't have. A argument my husband and I often had over the years. My Amendment 39 inserts Section 201 of Limit, Save, Grow to rescind unobligated COVID funds to result in $29.5 billion in immediate savings. COVID is over, simply put. We need to stop paying for these unnecessary programs. My Amendment 42 inserts Division B, Title III of the Limit, Save, Grow Act to repeal federal spending on the Green New Deal tax credits, resulting in $569.5 billion in savings. My Amendment 43 requires any future pauses on student loan repayment to be approved by Congress. This ensures the executive branch can never again abuse their authority. All of my amendments strengthen this bill to make good on the promises we made to the American people, and I urge the committee to make my amendments in order, and I thank you so much for your time. I yield.
Thank you. Are there any questions on the Democratic side? Are there any questions on the Republican side? I want to thank all of our witnesses for appearing before us today, and we appreciate it.
Chairman, I didn't at the beginning say thank you all for the time given.
You're very kind. Thank the gentlelady. Are there any other questions? Well, for the panel, we've done that. Is there anyone else seeking to testify on H.R. 3746?
Oh, I think I got another one.
Seeing none, hearing none, this closes the hearing portion. Without objection.
Chair now recognizes Ms. Boebert from Colorado.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Goffman, are the EPA's rules to regulate light, medium, and heavy-duty vehicles economically feasible for middle-class and hardworking American families living month to month and struggling with inflation?
Thank you for that question. It's a question that we take very seriously as well, and we've designed these rules to work hand in hand with the plans that we know that industry has to introduce and market clean
Mr. Goffman, what is the average price of a new combustion engine vehicle compared to the average price of a new electric vehicle?
I don't know the exact dollars. I know that today the EVs may be more expensive, but these rules.
So the average price of a traditional internal combustion engine was $45,600, while the average price of an electric vehicle was $61,800. And if these unfavorable rules are finalized, your own estimates that I've seen suggest 67% of all new cars sold in the U.S. will need to be fully electric by 2032. Now, how much did the average price of an electric vehicle increase by last year?
I don't know, but
So it's 22%. From May of 2022 to May of 2023, it's increased 22%. So it's not going down in price with these electric vehicles. We're seeing an increase. And by your own estimates, the technological costs of this proposal could reach $280 billion. That's increasing manufacturing costs by $1,200 per vehicle. Mr. Goffman, are you aware that in temperatures under 20 degrees Fahrenheit, electric vehicles lose nearly half of their charge in their batteries?
Yes.
Yes. So in Colorado, where we rely on four-wheel drive vehicles to get around in winter, many of these vehicles will be regulated out of existence under these proposed rules. How much does an electric vehicle battery cost to replace?
I don't know offhand, but you're putting your finger on important issues, which is exactly why the strategy reflected in these rules is to give industry years of lead time. to
Well,
address
well, you're
these
regulating an industry out of existence here, and we're seeing that it's less reliable. In Colorado, it's very common to have temperatures under 20 degrees Fahrenheit, and these batteries will lose some of their charge. Now, I have between $5,000 and $20,000 to replace an electric vehicle's batteries. And prolonged exposure to temperatures under 20 degrees can also compromise the electric vehicle's battery performance as much as 41%. Now, how do you recommend that hardworking families who are struggling to get by absorb these additional costs associated with electric vehicles?
Well, our projection is that by the time these rules go into effect, both the industry and investments like those made in the IRA and the
So we're just going to print more money to make up for that. So, I mean, we're seeing a 22% increase in 1 year for the cost of electric vehicles. Even the tires on electric vehicle wear 20% faster. I don't think that the average American taxpayer is looking for another federal government bailout for tires. I mean, over half of Americans have less than $1,000 in their savings account, and you're wanting them to spend more money on vehicles where the price is increasing, be at 41% higher at risk for having to change out a battery, tires that wear 20% faster than your average car. Now, please name 2 domestic mines that you support, Mr. Goffman, and that are critical to helping produce the amount of minerals necessary for the electric vehicles you've been praising today.
Well, the information I have is that in just under a year since the IRA was passed, 75 new facilities have been started to...
Domestic mines?
Including domestic mining.
Can you name any
that
you support?
And I'd be happy to get behind.
So the Rosemont mine and the Resolution Copper mine are 2 mines in Arizona blocked by the environmental extremists and the federal bureaucrats that would produce massive amounts of copper in the United States. The Biden administration has also blocked the Twin Metals mine in northern Minnesota, and Democrats on the Natural Resources Committee oppose all domestic mining. And if we don't mine for these minerals necessary, where are they going to come from? The 40,000 children mining for cobalt in the Congo with their bare hands in these China-owned mines, and then we buy these products from China and somehow feel virtuous about ourselves while they're building some 200 coal-fired energy plants. These rules do not benefit the hardworking Americans that I represent, and I hope that you would reconsider them and the costs that the American family is going to have to absorb because of them. My time has expired, and I yield.
Chair recognizes
Boebert is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Levins, as director of the NPRC, how many unanswered requests do you currently have?
As of yesterday, there were 338,000 unanswered requests, of which 265,000 are considered backlogged.
And how many unanswered requests are too many?
We service about 30,000 a week, and generally speaking, prior to the pandemic, our customer service standard we were trying to achieve was 10-day turnaround time, so more than 60,000 would be too many to serve in 10 days or less.
So I know for a fact that my congressional office has contacted the NPRC multiple times to help veterans obtain a copy of their records to verify eligibility and receive their benefits. We saw the backlog of requests skyrocketed to over 600,000, and this is often times too late for a veteran to receive life-saving care because bureaucrats were refusing to show up for work. So I see that that number is about half now, but are your employees back at work full-time?
Yes.
In person?
Yes, since March of 2022.
March of 2022. And from what I understand, the backlog has decreased significantly after the NPRC returned to in-person work after multiple requests from Congress to do exactly that. You said you came back to work in 2022. Everyone came back in person. Why did that take so long?
So I want to be clear, first of all, we never closed entirely. We always maintained a skeletal crew there to make sure we handled the most urgent requests, such as those involving funerals, medical emergencies, homeless veterans seeking shelter. Throughout the pandemic, as local health conditions improved, we were able to bring additional people into the building. We worked with the National Institute of Occupational Safety and Health to review our building blueprints, our HVAC systems, and inform our leadership on what the safe amount of occupancy in the building was. But we at the time, our records were analog, not digital. We were not able to work remotely. We've made a lot of changes since then.
Agencies are transitioning away from paper records, but NPRC still stores millions of records in 2 facilities in St. Louis. When a veteran or former civilian employee needs a copy of their records, often to verify these eligibilities for benefits and whatnot, the NPRC staff has to pull and file those and process the requests. So it's clearly impossible to do that remotely. So that would explain why your backlog reached 600,000. I am happy to hear that it's down, but I think there's still a lot of work to do because this is certainly impacting my constituents back home. Deputy Commissioner Poist, how did the SSA's transition to exclusively remote customer service during COVID negatively impact elderly citizens who previously relied on in-person service?
Thank you for that question. So in the early days of the pandemic, we definitely recognized some challenges that we experienced as we transitioned from that in-person service to mostly telephone and internet service in the early days of the pandemic. I think once we were able to kind of, I call it, find our footing, I think service did improve to the American public. We did experience also some challenges with our 800 number. I think we've since kind of overcome those challenges. We see a stable system today, and we are hoping to implement our new next generation telephony project system by the end of this fiscal year.
Can the SSA expedite disability determinations for applicants who don't have over 200 days to receive the benefits that they are entitled to?
We'll have to take that one back for the record. I'll have to get our operational experts to weigh in on that one.
Thank you. Assistant Secretary Bitter, if your family had planned a trip and they needed their passports, they needed them issued, renewed, would you prefer to have your appointment before or after the trip is scheduled?
Thank you for the question. We publish our service standards widely so that people don't have to make that choice, so that they can renew their passport. It's before they make their plans.
So in my district, due to the backlog of the Department of State, several of my constituents and their families did not receive their passports on time. And when they requested appointments, they were scheduled for after their trips. This certainly has caused many families to have to cancel their trips, whether that's for pleasure or something serious. And this is an issue that comes up in all of our offices regularly. And so we would love to work with you to expedite all of these services that are provided and that are represented here today.
We would love to work with your constituent services staff.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I yield.
Joan yields back her time. Thank you very much. The gentleman from Florida.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our witnesses for joining us today. Ms. Kendall, why do you think the EPA sides with extremist environmentalists on bogus regional haze mandates to shut down coal plants under the guise of improving visibility in national parks?
I think that there are real issues with regional haze that affect national parks, and EPA is fulfilling their statutory duty under the Clean Air Act.
So with all due respect, I think the regional haze rule is just another way for leftists to arbitrarily target fossil fuels they are philosophically opposed to. In Craig, Colorado, a community in my district, they have been forced to close a $3 billion power plant because of regional haze settlement, which will kill hundreds of good-paying jobs and devastate the local community. And we're already seeing the impacts of that. 36.92% of property taxes in the county come from the Craig coal power plant. Ms. Kendall, in your testimony, you state decisions regarding how our nation leases federal coal resources have significant consequences for all Americans. Now, how do you and other leftists ignore the devastation you are causing to minorities and people in rural America who are hit hardest by these anti-fuel mandates?
I'm not sure what anti-fuel mandates you're talking about with regard to the federal coal program, because the declines have been due to market responses and to coal companies withdrawing
Would that be the federal
leases.
government's heavy hand tipping those scales with the subsidies in the market? Because I don't think the federal government is doing a good job of letting the markets decide. It seems that people and their decisions that are made here in this building choose winners and losers for that market.
I think you could also look at the federal coal program when you're with that line of argument. From the beginning, the federal government intentionally set the price of coal for federal coal leases to be below market in order to keep energy costs down for Americans.
And energy costs were down. They are not anymore. We have 20 million Americans who cannot afford their utility bills. This is not the first example of leftists regulating our rural communities into poverty under the guise of climate change. Colorado's Western Slope used to have a booming energy production economy. More than 1,700 coal mines have operated in Colorado in the last 160 years, and there are only 6 coal plants remaining, which will be closed or converted by 2031. Now, Ms. Kendall, why is the EPA inaccurately attempting to interpret Clean Air Act Emissions Control Authority to fundamentally transform how an entire sector of the U.S. economy generates power today with his proposed power plant rule?
Could you repeat the question?
I just want to know why the EPA is inaccurately attempting to interpret the Clean Air Act Emissions Control Authority. This is job killing. It's proposed rules that puts the Green New Deal agenda ahead of rural America and communities that rely on affordable and reliable energy.
I was not prepared to come today to speak to the EPA's clean power, the EPA's rules.
Perhaps we'll have you better prepared next time you visit. How many coal lease sales has the federal government held since Joe Biden took office?
I don't know the exact number. I believe there have been one or two.
Haven't there been one small sale? Would be 0.
Okay.
And how many coal power plants did China permit last year?
I do not know.
Well, according to a report done by the Global Energy Monitor and the Center for Research and Energy and Clean Air, which I asked unanimous consent to submit into the record.
Vote objection.
China permitted more coal power plants last year than any time in the last 7 years, which is the equivalent of about 2 new coal power plants per week. Now, we've heard a lot about carbon emissions, and of course, we are in favor of carbon capture and producing that. But wildfires in my district emit more carbon emissions in just a few short days than every vehicle in my home state of Colorado running 24/7 for an entire year. So, I mean, I think we need to bring forest management into this equation. But since we are talking about coal here, do you know that the rate that China is outpacing the rest of the world with building new coal-fired power plants?
I'm not familiar.
China has 6 times as many plants starting construction as the rest of the world combined. American energy is not the issue. It is our adversaries who are doing so irresponsibly throughout the world. We need good, clean energy production here, and we would appreciate it if the extremists would get out of the way and the federal government would stop choosing winners and losers so Americans can afford their energy once again. Mr. Chairman, I yield.
Chair now recognizes Ms. Boebert, our friend from Colorado.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. It's amazing. I've heard today that this will have no impact on consumers, and then I also heard that in 3 years these changes will be required to take place, and the companies will then have to make those adjustments and pass on those increases to consumers. So it would seem that there's certainly a deficit to the American people in this. Undersecretary Richmond, why does the Biden administration not care about the hardworking Americans struggling to make ends meet that won't be able to afford your agency's new regulations for gas stoves? As we just heard, in 3 years, this will be passed on to consumers for gas stoves, clothes washers, dishwashers, clothes dryers, air conditioners, light bulbs, et cetera?
Well, thank you for that question. My statistics are really about the gas stoves with regards to that issue. But let me again reinforce the fact that 50% of those gas stoves.
That still gets passed on to the consumer. So just by saying that somebody is more well off, more wealthy than someone else, that doesn't matter, that argument is not flying with me. From mandating new electric vehicles and electric stove mandates to promoting ESG extremism to pushing radical Green New Deal policies, there's one thing you can always count on in this administration to do, and that's put the American people and our economy last. Dr. Richmond, do you believe, like many of our other colleagues, like many of your other colleagues in the Biden administration, that gas stoves strongly contribute to climate change through greenhouse gas emissions?
Well, I'm here today to talk about the
do you believe that gas stoves, which you said you're here to talk about, do they contribute strongly to climate change through greenhouse gas emissions?
We believe that anything that puts out carbon dioxide does contribute to more, such as a gas
Interesting.
stove.
So I'd respond by pointing out that many of the false and misleading studies that have been cited by this administration to support banning gas stoves were authored and paid for by radical environmental extremists and these activists with an agenda to ban fossil fuels entirely. Now, you testified that the Department of Energy does not have the authority to ban gas stoves. Does Consumer Product Safety Commission have the authority to ban gas stoves?
I don't believe so, but that's not something I'm certain about. I'd be happy
Well,
to
then
get
why,
back to you
Dr.
on it.
Richmond, did Richard Trumka Jr., a commissioner appointed by Joe Biden at the Consumer Product Safety Commission, say, and I quote, "Gas stoves are a hidden hazard. Any option is on the table. Products that can't be made safe can be banned," end quote.
The Department of Energy has no authority to ban gas stoves.
If the Biden administration isn't seeking to ban gas stoves, as you claim, then why did a Biden-appointed Commissioner Trumka initiate a notice for proposed rulemaking to ban gas stoves in American homes?
I cannot answer that because the Department of Energy has no authority to ban gas stoves.
Does the Consumer Product Safety Commission have that authority?
I don't believe
You
so.
have
but
a
I'm not
commissioner here advocating for this. Has Commissioner Trumka ever been disciplined for going rogue, as you were trying, as some are trying to claim that he did?
The Department of Energy does not have the authority to ban gas stoves.
Has he ever been? Has Commissioner Trumka ever been disciplined for going rogue with this statement?
I have no idea.
If he hasn't been disciplined, he is still an acting Consumer Product Safety Commissioner, and he has aggressively tried to ban gas stoves in American homes. This is shameful that you can sit here and try to claim that the Biden administration isn't trying to ban gas stoves. Do you think that Commissioner Trumka should resign or be disciplined for his comments and efforts to ban gas stoves and end this consumer product?
I'm sorry, I don't have anything to say about that.
You wouldn't condemn any remarks like that? Mr. Chairman, I would like to yield the remainder of my time to you.
Of cartels and other producers within Mexico as well.
Well, I'm out of time. I appreciate you being here and your testimony, and thank the chairman for holding this hearing, and I yield back.
Chair now recognizes Ms. Boebert from Colorado for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Gupta, nationwide, over 100,000 people have lost their lives from drug overdoses. We've heard a lot about that today. 1,799 of those deaths were Coloradans. Now, your office works with 19 federal agencies and oversees $41 billion with a goal of addressing overdoses and addictions, correct?
Yes, Congressman.
Your office is also responsible for implementing the Biden-Harris National Drug Control Strategy that was released over a year ago, correct?
That is correct.
Dr. Gupta, a key component of the Biden-Harris plan is to go after those who smuggle drugs into our borders, correct?
That is correct.
Why has this administration rolled back immigration policies that have a proven track record to secure the southern border, such as Title 42 or Remain in Mexico?
Thank you, Congressman, for that question. Of course, I would defer all the questions to Homeland Security on the immigration piece. I can tell you on the drugs piece, we have more seizures today than we have had at any time.
Do you believe that's because more is coming over than at any other time?
I think we have better technology. I think we have more committed men and women in uniform.
Fentanyl is currently the #1 cause of death for adults 18 to 45. This is still getting into our country and still killing Americans throughout our nation. So would you agree that more fentanyl is coming across and that's why the seizures have increased?
I think what I would say is this. It is important to seize every piece of fentanyl that comes across our border, but at the same time, it doesn't begin or end at the border. It is important for us to look at the supply chain globally, as well as the profits that the traffickers are making off of it, as well as producers.
Dr. Gupta, you've noted that a significant amount of fentanyl comes through the ports of entry at the southwest border, correct?
Yes, Congressman.
You are aware that the Biden administration's parole program through the CBP One app, correct?
I'm not involved with that program.
Are you aware of the program?
Just publicly, whatever I hear on the news.
Do you know how many inadmissible aliens were encountered at the ports of entry at the southwest border in fiscal year 2020?
I would have to defer those to Homeland Security.
Well, I just happen to have that answer. In fiscal year 2020, OFO encountered a little over 57,000 inadmissible aliens at the ports of entry. Do you know how many were encountered in fiscal year 2022?
What do you know?
Up from 57,000 to over 172,000. Do you know how many have been encountered so far in fiscal year 2023?
I would still defer you to Homeland Security.
So in fiscal year 2020, we had 57,000 inadmissible aliens at the ports of entry. 2022, over 172,000. And in fiscal year 2023, it's over 276,000. Now, is it fair to say that the OFO officers are much busier under Biden CBP One app parole program?
Once again, Congresswoman, I would, make sure that I would just defer all those questions because I'm not engaged in the immigration policy of the United States.
Well, I would recommend that you possibly have a discussion with OFO, if you haven't already, on how that increased flow affects officers' ability to interdict fentanyl at the ports. Would you agree?
I will continue to have those conversations. I have visited the border several times, and it is really important that we ensure that 109,000 Americans are dying, that we do everything in our capacity.
I agree, and I think that starts with securing the border, since we're seeing this increase of inadmissible aliens at our ports of entry. We know that people are coming over illegally. We have hundreds of thousands of gotaways, and certainly the amount of fentanyl deaths that you just mentioned are extremely severe. And I would say that is because more fentanyl is coming through our wide open southern borders, and it's because of the policies that have been implemented since January 2021. Dr. Gupta, I urge you and the Biden administration to please crack down on fentanyl and secure our borders. Have this conversation to keep Americans safe so we can put an end to this. I appreciate your time here today. My time has expired, but thank you for testifying before our committee, sir.
Chair now recognizes Ms. Luna from Florida for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Gupta.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Wood, can you please elaborate on why the Biden administration rescinding important ESA reforms made by the Trump administration that modernized the ESA, including the regulatory definition of habitat, are misguided and bad for rural America?
Sure. As I discussed my written testimony and discussed today, the only place critical habitat can really provide value is areas where the land triggers that federal nexus. It's going to require a federal permit to damage existing habitat features. It cannot serve to encourage the restoration of habitat or the active maintenance of habitat. Rescinding the Trump's definition of habitat, which we had some disagreements with on the margin, but was overall correct in saying habitat is only those areas suitable for a species, serves to make it easier to designate precisely those areas where critical habitat doesn't work, and worse, creates perverse incentives by making the potential to establish habitat a liability for landowners.
Thank you. I'm going to come back to you in just a second. Director Williams, should the gray wolf be delisted in the lower 48?
Mr. Chair, Congresswoman Boebert, and we are in the midst of petitions and litigation on that very issue.
Would you agree that they need to be delisted?
When they meet the 5 criteria of
So
the
there are
Endangered
over
Species Act,
6,000
yes.
wolves in the lower 48 United States, and the initial agency recovery goal was 650 wolves. So both Obama and the Biden administrations have supported delisting the gray wolf, including when Mr. Ashe was director. It shouldn't take an act of Congress or more than a decade to delist a recovered species. So I would say that it has met that criteria, and you're saying once it meets that criteria, then yes, it should be delisted. And I would say that this takes away from our precious resources from other species that actually need our help that are on the Endangered Species Act. And Mr. Wood, back to you. Are you aware of a statutory provision that authorizes Fish and Wildlife Service to require mitigation under Section 7?
Nothing that explicitly requires it, but under Section 7, they have to consult over federal projects. And
Okay, or do you agree that Section 7 does not include the words mitigation or offsets, and such requirements for Section 7 were never authorized by Congress?
I believe with the first part, from what I understand, often mitigation is proposed by federal agencies as a way to avoid more extensive consultation, so there's some uncertainty there, but you're right that the words, I believe, don't appear in that section.
Thank you. Director Williams, why did Fish and Wildlife Service not allow public review and not allow public comment for its recently released ESA compensatory mitigation policy?
Mr. Chair, Congresswoman Boebert, I follow the Administrative Procedures Act, the law, when we put forward any rulemaking, and I don't believe that the APA applies to mitigation policies. So we did follow the law in putting those forward.
Why is it that the Fish and Wildlife Service is proposing to burden landowners with onerous ESA-related prohibitions when the agency has insufficient information to support a listing of the dune's sagebrush lizard?
Mr. Chair, Congresswoman Boebert, indeed, I have spent a long time, a career of working even on the dune sagebrush lizard. I'm looking at my previous colleague, Mr. Ashe, and the science was very clear on the dune sagebrush lizard. In fact, I brought with me the proposed listing. What happened with dune sagebrush lizard is for many years, it's an example of the positive conservation outcomes of the possibility of a listing happening. That didn't happen, and could be extinct in all of their range.
So I would say this is yet another species of whom it appears the Fish and Wildlife Service is basing a listing decision on the precautionary principle. The service appears to be speculating about the future trends, even while admits it can't be certain because of the species habitat and it's on private lands.
If that's a question, Congresswoman Boebert, indeed a threatened status talks about foreseeable future, but endangered status does not. Those are threats before us right now to the dune sagebrush lizard
As long as we could get
habitat.
the actual recovered species off of the list, then I think we can make a lot of progress. Mr. Chairman, I yield.
Thank you, Chair. Back. Is there further discussion on the bill? Ms. Patola, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to yield my time to the representative from Nevada, Representative Lee.
Thank you. I just would like to address clarify a few statements. Normally, when you borrow money, you pay interest. And if you're able to borrow money without paying interest and only principal, that is technically a subsidy. So I want to clarify that the terms of this, allowing people to borrow money without interest, is generally not how most people borrow money. Secondly, the CBO, again, in 2015, estimated that this bill, the WIN Act, would have a net loss of $540 million. This is really taking a short-term gain for a long-term potential loss. And while prepayment allows taxpayers to see benefits in the short term, we should be ensuring prepayment benefits the public and provides both short-term and long-term benefits and interest to our taxpayers. And with that, I yield.
Thank you. So it's very disheartening to hear that my colleagues on the other side of the aisle want the American public to pay more in interest. This is a way to save money for the taxpayers and also generate revenue to the Treasury. The CBO projected that this provision would expedite payments and generate $639 million in receipts for the Treasury from repayment over the 2015 to 2024 fiscal year period. So CBO, they're
Can I
the ones
reclaim
that
my
said-
time?
Yes, ma'am, I yield.
That's, again, this is a short-term versus a long-term issue. And
I'm just sorry that you
but
want American citizens to continue paying higher interest rates.
Excuse me, ma'am, I, first of all, was considerate enough to yield my time to you, so I hope I can receive the respect in return. I just wanted to clarify, there is a short-term benefit and a long-term cost to this bill. It reduces our oversight as a congressional body, and with that, I yield.
Lady yields back.
The gentlewoman from Colorado, Ms. Boebert, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for being here today and testifying before our committee. Mr. Blakemore, clearly China is dominating the entire world when it comes to mineral supply chains, but why is that? Why are we so desperately far behind the curve when it comes to China and these rare earth minerals?
It's a combination of multiple factors. First and foremost, China embarked on a aggressive strategy of investing in upstream resources abroad, right? And those investments drew a lot of those resources domestically to China, where it was able to construct a pretty strong market share on the processing part of key supply chains. Facilitated also by high subsidization and in some cases rather lax environmental regulation. That's gotten us to the point now where China's market incumbency both puts it ahead of the United States in terms of certain supply chain resiliency efforts, but also makes reducing that market incumbency a little bit sticky given the economics associated with those respective supply chains.
Do you think that the President Trump administration, his executive orders in 2017 that were proposed steps to form a national strategy to strengthen our domestic supply chains, do you think that that would have helped in this and so we wouldn't be so far behind the curve?
I think the efforts more broadly by over the course of several administrations actually have advanced a more holistic approach to thinking about our supply chain resiliency. The Trump administration, to its credit, did a lot of work to think specifically about upstream resiliency. However, upstream resiliency alone is not a solution to supply chain resiliency, right? And I think as our thinking and strategic planning around supply chain resiliency matures, moving down the supply chain as well and thinking about the on-take and off-take of various components of the supply chain to build that strategy is also necessary. So I look at the Trump administration decision as one piece, a critical piece, but one piece of what I would call a healthy supply chain resiliency strategy.
Thank you. It sounds like we would agree that the way the United States determines what is considered a critical mineral and how we manage these supply chains and what production advantages, if any, listed critical minerals we receive over unlisted mineral commodities is of national importance. Dr. Eggert, excuse me, you have been involved in critical mineral and material assessments for decades, and it seems that these assessments have helped highlight some of the challenges that we're facing. But are we, as a nation, making headway in improving our situation with respect to critical minerals?
I think we are making improvements, but there's always room for more improvement. I think in terms of 3 specific areas where we should focus attention. First, research and development throughout the entire supply chain. Second, workforce development. It takes workers to mine the minerals and do the various downstream processing activities, and we've lost much of that capability. And third, there's significant room for improvement in permitting and associated pre-production activities, not to minimize or reduce the importance of environmental protection or interaction with local communities, but in a way that gets us to yes or no, and how in terms of project development sooner.
Thank you. And Mr. Summers, to me, it seems that this administration says one thing about mining in America, but does something completely different. They do another thing. Has the critical materials list yielded any results in terms of creating jobs or economic development in your state? We just heard that one improvement to the supply chain and this energy security would be to improve the workforce.
Yeah, I do think that there's utility in highlighting the supply chain vulnerabilities that we have, but in terms of bringing specific investment or jobs to the state because a mineral is on the list or not on the list, we haven't seen that in Utah. And I think that the bigger issues are some of the other things that we've talked about. I mean, it's what's the federal government's policy, especially in a public land state like Utah. What are the federal government's policies with regard to how you can open up and permit and develop a mine? And then also, is the federal government going to come in and make the economics of a mining project more difficult because of royalty rates or other things that they might be contemplating? So I think that those are the more important issues as opposed to whether a mineral's on a list or not.
Thank you. And Mr. Chairman, may I ask one yes or no question, Mr. Summers?
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you. So has the Biden administration's decision to leave out critical minerals like uranium and helium on the list had any adverse impacts on job creation or economic development? And you can expand later, but maybe just for now, yes or no?
I think that it has, yes.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for all of you and your time here today. I yield.
Thank you very much. Our next representative.
Gentlewoman yields back her time. Distinguished gentlewoman from Colorado is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the witnesses for being here today. Mr. Dorman, on August 4th, 2023, White House Chief of Staff Jeff Zients sent an email stressing the importance of increased in-person work, stating increasing in-person work is a priority for President Biden to, quote, deliver better results for the American people, end quote, by improving teamwork and productivity within the federal workforce, which contradicts the previous statements. Folks have argued that the email was only sent as a result of a fairly aggressive letter that was sent from this committee, from the Oversight and Accountability Committee, by myself, Chairman Comer, and Subcommittee Chairman Sessions. Was there any confusion within your agency after this change of tone?
I think we did reach out to OMB to seek clarification, Congresswoman, because in response to OMB M2315, which calls for significant increase in meaningful in-person presence, the NRC had significantly increased our in-person presence in November of 2021, and the plan that we provided to OMB in May in response to that memo and got OMB's feedback we were wondering if this email was suggesting a change in expectation. And so we circled back with OMB and confirmed that their expectation was that we move forward with the plan that we had provided to them. And they were really looking for, okay, now implement.
Okay, and did the White House email result in more employees in your agency actually getting back to work in person, working full-time? And if it did, then what is that percentage of your workforce that is back to work, working in person 5 days a week?
The Congresswoman, I don't have that specific percentage, but in the first half of this calendar year, approximately 60% of NRC's work was in-person work. That memo did not, as I indicated, that didn't change anything because we had already had our plan, gotten feedback from OMB, and we're working toward implementation of it.
And are you still bringing more employees back to work in person?
So our model at this point is focusing on the purpose of the in-person presence. So we're really looking at how we're bringing people back and making sure that it's actually got the meaningful engagement, so that we're optimizing the way we're working in a hybrid environment.
Okay. Tex, could you please tell me what the agency's telework policies were prior to COVID?
So telework, again, was, well, like now, and thank you for the question, was handled still on a case-by-case basis. There was not as much telework prior to the pandemic. That has increased during the pandemic. We fortunately equipped our employees with equipment before the pandemic to enable them to work remotely, so it was somewhat seamless from that standpoint, but it was a very low rate of telework before the pandemic, and then post-pandemic it stayed at a higher rate. Currently, as indicated in the statement, where 85% spend the majority of their time in the office, and then 15% are in a telework status, which is typically 2 days per pay period.
So what was the agency's telework policies when they were at their maximum with telework?
I would have to get the exact number to you. That would have been during FY 2020 when everybody went out for the pandemic.
And were you monitoring what employees were actually logging on and producing work products?
So I think the way that's done is via the office performance metrics.
And there were policies in place to track that, to ensure that employees were working during the time that they were home?
The supervisors are responsible for the employees' work, whether they're in the office or remote, absolutely.
Sorry, my time is running out. In April 2023, OMB issued guidance that called for increased meaningful in-work person work. Did this guidance result in any changes to the agency's telework policies?
That was for me, ma'am?
Yes.
Yes. We have seen a decrease of about 20,000 employees from the height of the pandemic until now that are no longer working in a telework status. So the actual memo, though, is the direction we were already moving prior to the memo, meaningful in-place work, and it is increasing. Our percentage is increasing.
Okay, and just quickly, Mr. Gibbs, what is your current reported occupancy rate in the NASA building for employees working full-time and in person? Because I'm just showing, since my time is short, I would like you to answer, but I'm showing that some agency headquarters reported occupancy rates as low as 9%.
So across the agency, on-site work is 66% right now for NASA.
Okay, my time has expired, Mr. Chairman. I yield.
Recognizes Ms. Boebert from Colorado.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our witnesses who are here. It's been very enlightening just hearing the wealth of information that you all are sharing and answering the questions. My first question is directed to you, Mr. Kogan. In your testimony, you falsely claim that because of the trillions of dollars spent in the Biden administration, that America has the, quote, strongest economy recovery in more than a generation, end quote. And I just want to know, are you aware that just yesterday America exceeded $33 trillion in debt? This is the first time in history, $33 trillion in history. And also, are you also aware that inflation's impact is on groceries, and that is at an all-time high?
Thank you for the question, Congresswoman. What I was saying was that real GDP, we are leading the pack in terms of real economic growth among the G7 nations. We are back to where CBO thought we would be, roughly, and that we've had the first V-shaped recovery of my entire life.
So Mr. Kogan, at $33 trillion in debt, all of this is due to wasteful Washington spending by Biden, by Pelosi, financed and borrowed and they financed and borrowed and printed money that we don't have. We are spending more than we are bringing in, and yet your testimony places blame on House Republicans who are working diligently to be fiscally responsible. We're in meetings daily right now trying to get our fiscal house in order so we don't go off of this fiscal cliff that we're all hanging on the edge of. But currently we have 20 million Americans who cannot afford their electric bill. Americans have lost more than $2 trillion in retirement savings, and gas is nearly $4 a gallon. And I mean, that's back up again under this administration, and Americans are paying more for absolutely everything else. People are struggling. All throughout Colorado's 3rd District, this is what I'm hearing. People cannot afford to live, and this doesn't sound like the strongest economic recovery in more than a generation to me. So now, Mr. Kogan, you also state in your testimony that under this administration, quote, inflation has gone down, end quote. And I mean, this is a bold-faced lie. Americans are paying more for everything. Do you know how much American families will pay due to inflation, the inflation tax in just over the next year?
Thank you, Congresswoman. Inflation in this case refers to the rate of inflation. That's how most folks talk about it.
Yeah,
So
but that's not how they feel it. That's not how they're actually paying for the goods and the needs that they're trying to provide for their family, their food, their gas, their electric bills, all of these things that I've mentioned. The correct answer for how much American families will pay for this inflation tax over the next year is $8,581. That's per family. That is absolutely absurd. And in most cases, this is more than a monthly income for most families. And Joe Biden has claimed that for the past 4 decades, he has that there has never been an economic failure. And the United States has never faced an inflation crisis as severe as we are facing under the Biden administration. So now, do you know how much a gallon of gas is right now compared to 2020?
Right near me, my gas station right next to me is about $1.50 more. The reason it was so much lower during 2020.
Because President Trump had us energy independent, and we were producing American energy right here, good, clean American energy. We weren't relying on OPEC as much. We were relying on the American roughneck. So that's why it was lower. I'll just answer that for you. But in 2020, retail gas prices averaged $2.17 per gallon, and now we're at $3.60 up to $4.32 per gallon. I mean, that's a 50% increase. That is absolutely dramatic and unaffordable to average Americans who are just struggling to get by. And what about a gallon of milk? I mean, that was $3.32, and now $4.09 for a gallon of milk. Eggs were $1.46 a dozen, and now they're $3.44. That's a 42% increase. Families cannot afford this. Now, my last question: you also state that that gains have been particularly strong among lower wage workers. Now, for the average American family, weekly paychecks have grown about $200, but those larger paychecks now buy about $100 less for those income earners. Now, do you know the annual impact inflation has on these American workers?
Congresswoman, real wages are up relative to pre-pandemic levels among non-supervisory and...
But that number is a fairy tale, is it not? If you're actually spending more for the same product that you were getting, but your paycheck looks bigger, but you're paying more for the goods that you were buying just a couple of years ago, the result is the equivalent of a $5,600 annual pay cut. So it may look good on paper. I know engineers love that. I know bureaucrats love that. I know the folks in Washington, D.C. in the bubble love the way things look on paper. But in the real world, that does not work. Bidenomics is failing American families, and so are these policies. And I hope that you would actually take a look into the real world rather than just on paper. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield.
Go to you next. Comment on any amendments you care to address.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I also have many amendments that I hope that the committee seeks favorable views on and approves, but I too am here to testify in favor of this rule. I'm very grateful to each and every one of you who are here staying in Washington, D.C. Over the weekend, even after many members have gone back to their districts for various reasons. Namely being they were told they could. But we are here to ensure that we are all working together to avoid a government shutdown. That is the last thing that I want. I am here to serve my constituents in Colorado's 3rd District. I am here to fight for our veterans, for our service members. I want to ensure that agencies are functioning, that paychecks are issued, and that I am able to do my job to better serve them back at home. And that's why I'm here this weekend. There's plenty of events that all of us could have run off to, whether they be official or unofficial, but we're here to do the hard work of governing. And unfortunately, we have wasted many months and now we are here at this critical deadline of government funding running out and us on the brink of a shutdown. But this shows a lot of good faith, us being here, dedicated, talking about this rule. My colleagues and I, we're fighting to fund the government. We're fighting to uphold the promises that we made to the American people back in January. We took that speaker's race very, very seriously, not because of a person, but because of the policy, because of the procedure. We wanted to ensure that we were making fundamental changes to the way Congress operates. When I go back home, people don't speak favorably of Congress and the way that we do things here. And we wanted to make sure that we had an impact to redirecting the House of Representatives back to the original intent that our founders had, that we would actually do the work of the people rather than just having these straight up and down votes where you have to pick and choose what's worse in the bill, what's better in the bill to actually get a final vote on passage or not. I was very excited that the days of having to pass a bill to find out what was in it were gone. We've implemented 72 hours to actually read a bill before we pass it, and we promised the American people that we would no longer govern by omnibus bills. And now we're at the brink of a continuing resolution, which is very much the same. And we promised them 12 individual, single subject bills to fund the federal government. We are here to prevent the continuation of swampy status quo that we all see each and every day up here. Commitments were made earlier this year to rein in reckless spending and business as usual in Washington, D.C., and we expect those commitments to be honored. There are thousands of unauthorized programs that continue to be funded without oversight, congressional hearings, or even a reauthorization vote. This is absolutely unacceptable to have thousands of unauthorized programs that we are continuing to fund without even having a discussion of how we are spending the American tax dollar. The American people deserve better than the previous majority's way of governing. Nancy Pelosi and Joe Biden bloated the budget and now we're seeking to continue that same budget. Some want this continuing resolution past September 30th, and I believe that that's completely unacceptable, especially now that Republicans have the majority here in the House. The American people voted for this majority to do things differently and fund the government in a new way that is not weaponized against them. We voted against the omnibus bill back in December, so why would any one of my colleagues on my side of the aisle vote to continue that past September 30th? Before the August district work week, the House passed just one of the 12 appropriations bills to fund the government. And we were promised that progress would be made over the 6 weeks that we were all back in district working with, hearing from, and serving our constituents, and that a plan would be in place when we got back. But instead, when we came back, you know, we welcomed $33 trillion in debt. We're looking at spending $7 trillion and only receiving $5 trillion, a $2 trillion annual deficit that we are all just very distraught over. I'm a mom of 4 boys. I got grandchildren. It is immoral for us to have a deficit this high. We have got to get the spending under control. And while there are disagreements on both sides of the aisle, and we're stuck at a crossroads here, there is a path forward. I'm so proud of the work that my colleagues have done. We have moderate Republicans and the most conservative Republicans working together to actually pass these bills individually. And the House should not go home this week once we begin voting without voting on these single subject bills that reduce bloated federal spending and show the American people that the Republicans, the majority that they voted for, can govern. It's not just a campaign slogan, but we actually get here, roll up our sleeves, and do the work that we promised the American people that we would do. And now is absolutely not the time to quit. We cannot risk a government shutdown, and this is why we are all here to do this job. We need to pay our brave service members. This is of the utmost importance. I've heard it mentioned in this committee today. They will be required to work in the event of a shutdown, and the same service members who have been subject to wokening and weakening of our military under this current regime, and Joe Biden, Secretary Lloyd Austin, they're suffering already. And to withhold their pay in the midst of that is also something that is very immoral and not our best. So I want to do this by passing the DOD bill that will fund the military to win every battle that we face in our upcoming future as the greatest nation. They need to have preparedness, military readiness, not just more focus on celebrating Pride Month. We also need to pay our brave border security officers. These Border Patrol officers, as you've heard today, they have been demoralized. I've talked to these Border Patrol agents who I've asked them, what can I do? What can I do to help you? And, you know, they tell me, we don't necessarily need more personnel because they're just processing agents at that point. We don't need more infrastructure at this moment. We don't even need more resources at this moment. We need the policy that allows us to do our job. Right now, we have a president that is ignoring the rule of law, our nation's immigration laws, and he is impacting the very men and women who risk their lives each and every day to secure our country. But they are there to stop the complete and total invasion taking place at the southern border, and that is infiltrating all of our states, making every state a border state, making this an issue in each one of our homes. In the last 30 months, Joe Biden and Secretary Mayorkas have been in control of the southern border. There have been 6.9 million CBP encounters and 1.7 million known gotaways. Let's do this by passing a strong DHS funding bill with strong policy writers to secure the border. And I applaud my colleague, Congressman Chip Roy's comments saying that this will get done. In funding the federal government, we will provide a solution to securing the southern border, to stopping or at least tremendously slowing down this flow of fentanyl, the tens of thousands of children that have gone missing, the deaths that have taken place, the innocent lives that have been lost because of these reckless policies. And also in the midst of a government shutdown, we cannot risk even the closure of our national parks, pausing passport and visa applications, grant applications, IRS verifications, mortgage approvals, new veteran benefits, and Social Security and Medicare applications. So thank you again for putting in this work. I ask you to continue to put in this work so we can avoid a government shutdown. We can get in this together, work together, put aside differences, and find a real solution for the people who are counting on us and are losing faith in us back home. Let's prove to them that we have their best interests at heart, that we aren't up here wasting time, that we care about their future, their children, and their children's children's future as well. Let's pass all 12 appropriations bills individually, single subject, through the People's House before September 30th, and we can keep the government open. We can stay here and do that work that we were elected to do. I'm here to do it, my colleagues are here to do it, and I'm proud to stand with you all today for the American people doing this work. Mr. Chairman, thank you so much for the time.
You're just in time. You are recognized for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the witnesses who are here today. I appreciate you all and your time. First, to start off, Mr. Kropstash, how do I say your name? I'm sorry.
Crowpatch.
Crowpatch, thank you. Would you mind elaborating on the impact of the fluid mineral leases and leasing process proposed rule, if finalized, will have on the oil and gas industry and smaller energy producers? So could you just elaborate on that impact?
Sure. At least in Wyoming, it'll force operators off of federal lands and off of the private and state lands that are adjacent due to the nature of horizontal drilling and the location of those lands. It'll also, due to the bonding requirements, force many of the small businesses in Wyoming, the small operators, out of business because they can't afford the increased cost in bonding in the time frame that's allowed.
Yes, thank you, and that's exactly right. I've heard several concerns from operators in my district on the western slope of Colorado that the increases mandated in this proposed rule will impact smaller producers who can't afford to operate in the market. These additional fees, as you know, will ultimately harm returns and reduce revenues to state and local governments by disincentivizing development on our federal lands. Now, the additional fees required by the proposed rule will reduce revenues and state and local governments. This is by disincentivizing development on these federal lands. Can you expand on the negative impacts the proposed rule will have on western states?
Yes, I think similar to Wyoming and the land ownership patterns, it'll force the production off of those lands. It'll reduce revenue and taxes that the states use to fund the local governments. In Wyoming, and we use those revenues and taxes to fund public education, infrastructure, emergency services, and things like that.
Yes, very important revenues going to those areas that will be lost for sure. The BLM and the Interior Department have stated increasing these fees will supplement the orphan well program. However, there are only 37 orphan wells, the gas wells on BLM managed lands. Now, do you think that their conclusion is unjustified?
I think the costs associated with that program are a very small percentage of the total revenue generated by the program, the onshore federal minerals program, and due to the processes BLM has to get those wells plugged by other record title owners and the previous operating rights holders. And so there's a very small number of orphan wells as a result of the federal program.
I agree, and the BLM has only utilized bonds to plug wells on federal lands 40 times over the last decade. These significant increases will tie up capital that would otherwise be put back into production. This is clearly another tactic from the Biden administration to de-incentivize domestic energy production. He would rather beg OPEC, Venezuela, and Iran to produce energy for us instead of relying on the American roughneck. Now, Mr. Crowpatch, the opposed fluid mineral leasing rule introduces the idea of using preference criteria to inform the BLM's selection of lands for lease sales. Given the administration's poor track record with respect to issuing lease sales and their lack of timeliness on drilling permit approvals, do you think that this new criteria could be problematic?
I think the new criteria will likely just eliminate further leasing and defer more parcels. The only criteria they'll really be able to use, the only expertise that they would have would be to just lease parcels that are in proximity to current oil and gas production. And what that does is it discourages exploration. And every basin that currently produces oil at one time was an exploratory basin. So if we discourage that, we're going to essentially eliminate any oil and gas production off of those lands.
Thank you. Mr. Kropatch, final question. The BLM director, tree spiking, Tracy Stone Manning, said in a statement that the proposed rule, quote, aims to ensure fairness to the taxpayer and balanced responsible development as we continue to transition to a clean energy economy, end quote. Do you think that the proposed fluid mineral leasing rule will do the opposite in many instances and actually prevent responsible domestic energy production?
Yes, I think if we're forcing in, as BLM, by their own admission in the rule, that they would force production off of federal lands, it's likely to be forced into production somewhere else that doesn't do it as cleanly and as efficiently as we do in Wyoming or in the United States.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Kropatch, and thank you to the rest of the witnesses here today. Mr. Chairman, I yield.
Thank you very much. I want to thank the witnesses for all their
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. McNeely, are you aware that in April of 2023, OMB issued guidance that called for increased, quote, meaningful in-person work?
I am.
So why has the Social Security Administration failed to provide any timeline for employees to return to the office?
Thank you for the question. So from a timeline perspective, our political leadership was back in the office in December of 2021. I think it's also important to note that in April of 2022, 75% of our workforce, our frontline workforce, which takes care of hearings, takes care of the field offices, they were also in on April of 2022. And right now, we are in the process of increasing headquarters and support staff in our headquarters offices.
So your response to the committee on September 14th failed to provide a response on how the agency plans to return to in-person work. And in fact, the only substantive answer was regarding the Social Security Administration's plans to adjust its real estate footprint. So I think it's very important if you're going to have a call for increased meaningful in-person work, then we need to understand that timeline and actually be able to fulfill it. So the Social Security Administration made an agreement that allows probationary employees with minor disciplinary actions and trainees to telework. Hold on, I'm not done. Like, that's just, think about that. Employees who are on probation, who have minor disciplinary actions, and trainees, they're allowed to telework. So wouldn't it make more sense for these workers under probation or who have had these disciplinary actions or trainees to work in the office to ensure improvement or to monitor their behavior?
So there is the authority to grant telework in those particular cases. What I would tell you is what we learned coming out of the pandemic is that our front office workers, specifically the trainees that you're talking about, they did not feel connected to the mission, and they did not feel connected to the teams that they were working with. So
it took a pandemic to realize that you can't train someone from home, that they need to be in person and connected to the team to actually learn how to do their job?
Well, no, that was the feedback that we got from them. And so when we had the opportunity to participate in a approach to get those individuals into the office so that they could work together, that's something that we do on a regular basis.
Well, it's unfortunate that you even had to experiment with that and receive that feedback to understand that someone isn't going to train well from home for a brand new position. Anyway, getting back to the Social Security Administration, do you know how many applications are currently on backlog?
What types of applications are you referring to?
So all sorts of applications that you have here in the administration. For instance, at the beginning of this year, the Social Security Administration reported that there were approximately 700,000 applications in the backlog. For reference, in January of 2020, there were only 41,000. Now, this has resulted in several of my constituents receiving unsatisfactory customer service to receive the benefits that they have worked for their entire lives. In fact, 3 out of 5 applicants who are applying for their Social Security benefits, 3 out of 5 applicants will be denied benefits after waiting for approximately 7 months. About 8,000 people file for bankruptcy, and approximately 10,000 people die each year while awaiting a decision from your agency. All the while, you all are allowing delinquent employees to sit on their sofas at home instead of actually getting to work and doing their jobs. This is absolutely unacceptable.
So our employees are working whether they are in the office or at home, and they are
Are you monitoring the work that they are doing from home on a regular basis?
Yes, we are.
Every employee, do you have the numbers of the hours that are submitted? Are you counting how many times they're logging into their computers and responding to casework?
So our employees are subject to the same performance management processes and oversight they are whether they're teleworking or working in an office. And we have systems in place that our managers use to schedule, assign, and track workloads. And that includes individual employee workloads in many cases. So real-time understanding of what actions are being processed at any particular given time. Additionally, our employees are required to be accessible to their supervisors, clients, colleagues, and external parties during work hours via a variety of means, including instant messaging, video platforms, and telephone. They are connected to the workplace, whether they are in the office or at the home.
Then why is the backlogs for Social Security applicants increased from 41,000 to 107,000?
Because we've been historically underfunded for a number of years now.
I don't think you're underfunded. You're funded at the Nancy Pelosi levels. At the Democrat levels, we just continued that same funding.
So I would say
At pandemic level spending.
So I'd say we have an increase of over 8 million beneficiaries over the last 10 years. At the same time, we experienced our lowest work staffing levels at the end of FY22. That's a math problem. I mean, that is a problem. If you have those workloads, increasing, and you don't have the staff to take care of those workloads, you're going to have the backlogs that you're talking about, Representative.
Well, I would love to hear more reports of your staff actually working in person and increase the meaningful in-person work that is done in your offices. I'm out of time, and I yield.
Gentlewoman yields back her time. The gentleman, my friend